Chapter 11:13. The High Cliff of Liangzhu. Today, Liangzhu could only be named as High Cliff. The vast Yuxiong Plain had been scraped 100 miles into the ground, but the original site of Liangzhu, which was about 1,000 miles in circumference, was still standing. Surrounded by a 100-mile abyss, Liangzhu stood alone. What else could it be if not a high cliff? On the eastern edge of the cliff was a row of neatly erected reed huts in Chichi. Many sect masters of the Tao League were sitting cross-legged on cloud platforms, their heads glowing with auspicious clouds. Lotuses of various colors could be seen drifting in the clouds, and specks of golden light dripped down along the edges of the clouds like pearls and pearls. At Daozu's order, these sect masters of the Tao League had come to help Liu Bang. In addition to themselves, they had also brought many of their disciples with them. A group of immortals had gathered under the reed huts, all silent and meditating on the cloud platforms. The higher-ups of Diyu had fled, and Liu Bang had replaced them. But Liu Bang had not really unified Diyu yet. Now, apart from Liangzhu, which had fallen into Liu Bang's hands, the whole Panga continent was in a state of anarchy, and there were all kinds of troubles. And all of these troubles required the support of the Tao League's immortals for Liu Bang. So, these immortals sat quietly under the reed huts, feasting on the wind and drinking dew. In the distance, the lights were brightly lit. Liu Bang's army was slaughtering cattle and sheep to celebrate their victory. The aroma of wine and meat wafted into the air, making the immortals frown and shake their heads. On the western edge of Liangzhu's high cliff was a row of reed huts as well, neatly arranged. The world venerables of the Buddhist League were sitting cross-legged on lotus platforms with their disciples under the reed huts. One of them was reciting mantras and explaining the wonders of the Buddhist League. At the same time, all the world venerables of the Buddhist League emitted auspicious lights from the top of their heads. Images of flying apsaras, heavenly dragons, rocks, and vajras shone in the void, fighting against the auspicious clouds emitted by the Tao League's immortals hundreds of miles to the east. Apart from the core disciples of the Buddhist League and Taoist League in the east and west camps, there were not many immortals and Buddhist cultivators left in Liu Bang's army. Along the way from the southern region to Liangzhu, Liu Bang split up his army and killed almost all the cultivators in the army under the instruction of the leaders of the Buddhist and Taoist sections. Even some primordial immortals and Buddhas from a few powerful immortal sects were killed by Dayu's revered elders from the secret palace. These Tao reasoning realm existences were also extremely talented people. They cultivated arduously as mortals, and it wasn't easy for them to reach their current cultivation level. They even established a great foundation. Unfortunately, they were not the direct disciples of Buddhism or Taoism, nor were they the direct disciples of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs. Therefore, they could only be cannon fodder in this battle. After all, there were too many people in the 3 realms who lacked divine positions. Many of the high-grade divine positions could only be filled by Tao reasoning primordial immortals and Buddhas, and they were sent to the investiture of the gods to fill those divine positions. The almighty experts of the Buddhist and Taoist sects in the east and west were sitting quietly, while Liu Bang's army was feasting and celebrating the victory. In a corner of Liu Bang's camp, some lucky survivors of the fierce battle were weeping and chanting sutras to expiate the souls of their elders. The elders of these cultivators from small immortal sects in outer heavenly realms were all killed by the revered elders from Dayu's secret palace, and they were the only ones who managed to escape. But their cultivation bases were low, and their aptitudes were extremely poor, so the almighty experts of the Buddhist League and Taoist League did not think highly of them. As Liu Bang was planning how to burn the bridge after crossing it, how could he care less about their lives? Tens of thousands of young cultivators who had survived secretly gathered in the corners of the camp, burning a few incense sticks, burning a few pieces of paper money, and singing a few lines of sutras for the souls of their elders who had died in the battle. This was also a way to show their sincerity. Everyone thought that it was a great victory for Diyu to abandon Liangzhu. Since then, the human race had truly fallen into the hands of Tao League and Buddhist League. Once the countless Yuan Ling in the investiture of the gods were conferred with their divine positions and filled up the vacancies in the heavenly Tao, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs would be able to interfere with the heavenly Tao of Pangu world with the power of the divine positions in the 3 realms, turning from existences who followed the heavenly Tao into real almighty experts who could forcibly interfere with or even change the heavenly Tao. They could also forcibly extract the fortune of the human race, change the world, and truly take control of Pangu world. If they succeeded, the Wahuang clan and the Holy Alliance would no longer be in their eyes. Even Pangu, who had been hiding for a long time, was the one who created Pangu world, and the heavenly Tao was determined by his will. However, the heavenly Tao was like a huge chessboard, and the divine positions of the heavenly Tao were the chess pieces on the chessboard. When all the chess pieces were in the hands of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs, how the game of chess should be played would be according to their will. The power of fortune of the great Tao of heaven was mysterious. Didn't all the arrangements of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs aim to completely control everything? Diyu was forced to abandon his foundation and flee. Although he had left a huge trouble for Liu Bang, in the eyes of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs, as long as Liu Bang inherited Diyu's foundation and became the human emperor, all the troubles would no longer be important. Therefore, while Liu Bang was celebrating the victory in Liangzhu, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs were also drinking and chatting merrily in the Dao Yuan Palace. They drank and celebrated excitedly, and at the same time, fiercely argued about the ownership of their priesthood when they were conferred as deities. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs strongly demanded that the 9 Daozu fulfill their original promise. The netherworld should be completely controlled by the Buddhist League, and at the same time, they were free to preach in Pangu world, and their disciples could even enter the officialdom and become herdsmen. But the 9 Daozu told the 7 Buddhist patriarchs in a righteous tone that after the first covenant was signed, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs had shamelessly betrayed it, supported the Shizo dynasty and the Ling dynasty supported by the Tao League, and caused great losses to the Tao League. Therefore, the conditions that the 9 Daozu had promised them had to be lowered. The disciples of the Buddhist League could only preach in outer heavenly realms, and Pangu continent could not interfere. Most importantly, at least 2 of the disciples of the Tao League had to be conferred as the great emperors of the 6 paths of reincarnation in the nether world. And they would be the lords of the human Tao and heavenly Tao, the most important in the 6 paths of reincarnation. How could the Buddhist patriarchs tolerate such conditions put forward by the Daozu? Although they had indeed betrayed the alliance, as the saying goes, every man for himself, they didn't feel that there was anything wrong with betraying the alliance. On the contrary, it was their betrayal that led to the appearance of the Wahuang clan, a terrible woman who had been eyeing the Buddhist League and Tao League from behind the scenes. Therefore, not only were they not at fault, but they had also made great contributions. At least, if it had not been for the cooperation of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs outside Empress Hua Palace, even in the face of the threat of the world breaker, would the Wahuang clan have allowed the conferment of deities to continue? If it had not been for the cooperation of the Wahuang clan, how could the higher-ups of Diyu have abandoned their great foundation and fled? With such a great contribution, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs believed that not only would the netherworld be completely managed by the Buddhist League, but also the new dynasty established by Liu Bang in the future. No matter what the name of the new dynasty was, in short, the Buddhist League would have a certain share of the benefits in this new human dynasty. For example, the Buddhist League should have at least 40 to 50% of the prefecture overseers. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs were bargaining in the palace of Tao origin, happily dividing up the benefits of Pangu continent. They were not in the mood to pay attention to the trivial matters in the outside world. Liu Bang had occupied Liangzhu, and Emperor Haozuan had fled with the higher-ups of Diyu. What else was worth their attention? Liu Bang was wild with joy. The disciples of the Buddhist League and Tao League in Liangzhu were indifferent, and the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs were busy dividing up the benefits. No one noticed the changes that were happening in the depths of the spirit cave below. In the boundless spirit cave, 360 dark supreme towers were hovering motionlessly amidst a violently tumbling vortex of energy. These supreme towers formed a huge sphere and a huge flag, which was golden in color and constantly spewed out large amounts of yellow light and auspicious air. There were also countless yellow lotus flowers gushing out, covering these supreme towers, completely isolating the aura of the supreme towers. The flag was one of the supreme treasures of Primal that the Wahuang clan carried with her, the earth-penetrating spirit flag. It was best at controlling the energy veins in the earth and manipulating the power of the earth for her own use. The sky-veiling flag of chaos in Wu Qi's hand was much stronger than the earth-penetrating spirit flag, but when it came to concealing aura and isolating the eyes and ears of outsiders, it was no match for the earth-penetrating spirit flag. In the center of the sphere formed by the 360 supreme towers, a fiend fetus of the earth-poisonous flame was growing rapidly. This fiend fetus was between a living creature and a non-living creature. With a mystic art, the oracles of the Thousand Spirit Palace of Diyu had fused the reproductive cells of some fiends into the energy veins in the Earth's core, allowing it to absorb the endless poisonous flame and develop into an embryo. Once it matured, it had the power to destroy everything in the world. In the sphere formed by the Supreme Towers, the speed of time was nearly 100 million times faster. The fiend fetus, which should have taken tens of thousands of years to mature, was about to break out of its shell in just one day. The moment it did, all the Supreme Towers disintegrated at the same time, and countless thunderbolts from the earth veins secretly concocted by the Directorate of Celestials of Diyu shot out and smashed straight into the fiend fetus. A deafening boom rang out as the earth-shaking flag vanished into thin air, while the fiend fetus, which was about to break out of its shell, was blown to pieces. Boundless fiend flame and resentment towered into the sky, rushing upward along the energy passages that had been laid out in advance on the cliff of Liangzhu. The cliff of Liangzhu, which stood 100 miles high, was densely covered with 108 layers of formations of the fiend-slaying sword formation. The fiend flame had smashed the formations along the way, but every time it passed through a formation, a part of the flame would be transformed into terrible sword energy. Wrapped in the sword energy, the fiend flame rushed up layer by layer, and when it reached the ground, all the flame was transformed into an invincible sword energy. Suddenly, millions of dazzling light spots burst out of the ground, and a vast amount of sword energy shot out of them. The sword energy soared straight into the sky, wrapping the entire cliff of Liangzhu tightly. Ignoring the generals and soldiers of the human race who were celebrating wildly, the sword energy went straight toward the cultivators of the Buddhist League and the Tao League on the cliff of Liangzhu. The world exalt of the Buddhist League, who was preaching the profound truths of the Buddhist League, bore the brunt of the attack. A dragon-shaped sword energy whistled through his body. The world exalt was stunned for a brief moment, and then 18 golden heads the size of water tanks were cut off from his golden body. Purple and gold blood sprayed all over the sky. This was only the first drop of blood tonight. Soon, a large cloud of blood mist enveloped the entire cliff of Liangzhu. With the fate of Diyu as the sacrifice, the self-sacrifice of 36,000 revered elders of the secret palace, the enormous power of the earth veins gathered in Yuxiong Plain, and the 108 layers of sword formations personally crafted by the Wahuang clan, the power unleashed was enough to kill all existences below the realm of Tao-fusing saints. The blood mist enveloped the surroundings, and even the moon in the sky had turned a strange blood color. Chapter 11:14. Lu Bang stood blankly in the center of the camp, staring in panic at the sword energies that filled the sky. He was surrounded by a large number of elite generals and civil ministers, and all of them were staring blankly up at the sky like toads that had been struck by lightning. No one could react at all. A plume of purple smoke wheeled over Lu Bang's head, in which 9 giant dragons were wheeling and letting out deep roars as they protected the area 100 miles around Lu Bang. As soon as the sword energies touched the mighty pressure emanating from the dragons, they immediately retreated and turned around to slash into the distance. Apart from the area 100 miles around Lu Bang, which was absolutely safe, miserable howls of despair could be heard coming from every corner of the camp. The human soldiers were safe, but the immortal cultivators and Buddhist cultivators whom Lu Bang had recruited and only pledged allegiance to him were slaughtered. How could these itinerant cultivators, most of whom were only heaven immortals, resist the terrible sword energies that could cut even Tao-breaking experts in half with a single slash. Wherever the sword energies passed, all the cultivators were cut to pieces. Streams of Yuan Ling shot up into the sky and were sucked into the investiture of the gods. Under the tents on the east and west sides of the camp, the world exalts and sect leaders all unleashed their supreme treasures of primal in horror, hoping that these powerful treasures could save their lives. But these treasures, which were usually invincible and indestructible, seemed to be greatly suppressed today. Their light had dimmed and were trembling, and they could not play any role at all. All the world exalts and sect leaders could only rely on their cultivation base to resist the incoming sword energies. But the endless sword energies contained the terrible heat of the poisonous flame in the earth's core, an irresistible pressure, and a suffocating aura of the law of heavenly Tao. It was as if the whole world was stirring and trying to kill them. What they were facing was not ordinary sword energies, but a terrible attack that was similar to the wrath of the heavens. The laws of the great Tao in this part of the void had been twisted by someone with a mighty divine ability. The laws of the great Tao over Yuxiong Plain were filled with a fierce, killing intent, and all the power of the great Tao had been transformed into an aura of slaughter, an aura that could kill all cultivators. Unless Liu Bang possessed the aura of the human emperor, and unless he practiced the orthodox cultivation technique of the human race, any other cultivator who dared to approach Yuxiong Plain tonight would be killed by the peerless sword energies. A few miserable howls rang out as the immortal energies around the few world venerables and sect masters were sliced apart by the sword energy layer by layer. Their attainments of Tao were wiped clean, and not long after that, their golden Dharma bodies were shattered. Even their immortal souls and relics were crushed by the sword energy. Only their prime original spirit floated up with the wind and was sucked into the investiture of deities from a distance away. In just a quarter of an hour, all the immortals and Buddhas on the high cliff in Liangzhu were killed, and so were the immortals and Buddhas whom Liu Bang had painstakingly recruited to be loyal to him. But the whistling sword energies did not stop there. Countless sword energies converged into a terrible sword beam that was 100 miles wide and tens of thousands of miles long, shooting straight toward the south of Liangzhu with a murderous aura. Dei Supremacy and Lord Shoujua had just found a few good cave abodes in the surviving mountains in the south of Liangzhu, and had just settled down their disciples and the immortals and Buddhas who had pledged allegiance to them. They had been sitting in the cave, glancing at each other and provoking each other. Abruptly, through their spirit powers, they sensed the earth-shaking change happening in the sky above Liangzhu city. They quivered in fright and immediately leaped up from the ground. They knew that this was an ambush set up by the Wahuang clan, but now that they were in Yuxiong Plain, the deadly sword formation would drag them all into it. Not daring to be careless, they hurriedly called for all their disciples to gather around them. A beam of light shot out from the center of Lord Shoujua's brows, sucking the disciples of the underhand sect and some of the immortals who had pledged allegiance to him into his interstitial world. After that, he transformed into a beam of light and fled toward the south. Dei Supremacy did the same. Lotus flowers bloomed in his hands, and the 3,000 Buddhist kingdoms he had condensed were all opened up. He hurriedly shoved the disciples of the Chan Monastery of Great Naga and some of the immortals and Buddhas who had pledged allegiance to him into the Buddhist kingdoms, then hurriedly transformed into a gust of fragrant wind and fled. The two of them had only fled less than 100,000 miles when a startling sword beam came whistling over from behind. The countless immortals and Buddhas they had left behind in the mountains in time suffered a great disaster at the same time. Countless immortals and Buddhas were struck by the sudden explosion of sword energy, and all of their immortal bodies and golden bodies were shattered. Their immortal souls and relics disintegrated at the same time, leaving countless Yuan Ling howling as they were sucked into the investiture of the gods. The sword rainbow converged again and chased after heavenly venerable Dei and esteemed monk Shoujua. They dared not to be careless any longer. The sword beam had the terrible power to kill their golden bodies. They no longer bothered to hide their strength, and unleashed the power of the peak of the Tao-breaking realm. Lord Shoujua unleashed the Grand Pure One's star pedestal tower. Countless starlights swirled around him, and with the power of the stars in the universe, he had left Yu Xiong plain in the blink of an eye. Dei Supremacy threw his head back and uttered the name of Buddha. A wisp of white light shot out from the center of his brows, in which the scene of Mount Gridrakuta appeared. With a sway of his body, he broke through the void and came to the front of Mount Gridrakuta. His speed of escape was more than 100 times faster than Reverend Shojua's. Even an ordinary revered one could not achieve the ability to teleport from Pangu continent to Mount Gridrakuta, which was located in the outer heavenly realm. Only the almighty experts of Tao fusing realm had such a divine ability. In Palace of Tao Origin, the faces of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs flushed with anger, and their bodies trembled violently as they watched the tragic deaths of dozens of their sect masters and revered ones. Although Lord Shojua and Dei Supremacy had escaped successfully, they were still so angry that half of the Palace of Tao Origin collapsed in their boundless rage. Unlike those outer sect disciples and successor disciples, the dozens of sect masters and revered ones they had sent to help Liu Bang were the result of their painstaking efforts, their true core disciples. Since the creation of heaven and earth, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs had founded the Buddhist League and the Tao League. They had lost countless disciples in countless apocalypses. However, only these disciples, who had the title of World Venerables in Buddhism and the title of Cult Master in Tao League, had survived the apocalypse of heaven and earth time and time again. After spending countless years together, not to mention how much effort they had put in to teach these disciples a lesson, their relationship as master and disciple was different from that of ordinary disciples. No matter how many disciples were killed or injured, they could accept it as long as it was for the apotheosis of gods. But these true core disciples were different. The death of any one of them made the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs feel a heart-wrenching pain. Normally, even if their immortal bodies and souls were destroyed, Yuan Ling would still be alive. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs would spend some of their vital energy to protect them for reincarnation, and they could still return to their sects after years of hard work. But now, the apotheosis of gods was not over yet. All of their Yuan Ling had been sucked into the list of deification, a powerful magical artifact personally crafted by the 9 Daozu. Once Yuan Ling was sucked in, even the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs could not reverse the process. At this time, they missed the Book of Life and Death and the soul hooking brush in Wu Qi's hands. If Wu Qi messed with them now and sent these killed world venerables and sect masters into samsara so that they could be reincarnated, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs would be very grateful to Wu Qi. But in the past, when they didn't want Wu Qi to mess with them, he did his best to send Yuan Ling, who was sucked into the list of deification, into samsara. Today, when they needed Wu Qi to mess with them and send these accidentally killed people into samsara, he actually went missing. These pitiful world venerables and cult masters were the pillars of Buddhism and Tao sects. If they were conferred with the position of heavenly Tao, their cultivation base would no longer be able to advance. 90% of their divine arts and magic power would not be able to be used. They would be restricted by their positions, and they would no longer be their original selves. They would be imprisoned by the heavenly path deity position for the rest of their lives, and there would be no hope of transcending mortality and entering sainthood. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs were so angry that their souls were about to fly out of their 7 orifices. Chi-Chi raised his head and looked in the direction of the realm beyond heavens. They really wanted to rush to the realm beyond heavens and tear the Wahuang clan into pieces. They really wanted to hack the 18 saints of the Holy Alliance into pieces. Although they didn't know what the Wahuang clan and the others had done under Liangzhu, an ambush with a restrictive spell could kill nearly 100 world venerables and sect masters of Buddhism and Taoism. If these Tao fusing cultivators had not joined forces, how could it have such a terrifying destructive power? The Wahuang clan. Tao Father Violet Brow was so angry that he vomited out a mouthful of blood. He hadn't recovered from his injuries to begin with, and now that his most beloved disciples had been wiped out, the wounds left behind by the soul scatter bow had flared up again. This mouthful of blood caused him to lose a few dozen eons worth of energy. Sitting next to purple-browed Daozu, Daozu hurriedly took out an immortal pill and fed it to purple-browed Daozu. Then, he gently stroked purple-browed Daozu's back and gritted his teeth as he murmured in a low voice, "Don't worry, senior brother. As for this matter, after we are conferred the title of deity, we'll use the deity position to control the power of the heavenly path, and then we'll settle the score with the Wahuang clan and the others." With a wry smile, Daozu drooped his eyelids and sighed in a low voice. If that's the case, well, many of the high-level deity positions are not enough, and now we can fill them up. The 6 celestial emperors of the celestial court, the 3 emperors of the earth realm, the mountain gods of the various tribes, and the 6 netherworld emperors of the netherworld. All of them will have their trusted disciples, and it will save us a lot of trouble in the future. Purple-browed Daozu panted and grunted. Gritting his teeth, he said, "What junior brother said is very true. But I can't accept it. We've carefully protected these disciples time and time again, protecting them through countless apocalypses of heaven and earth, and through countless life and death tribulations. Just as we were about to succeed, we were sent to the deity position." The faces of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs were twisted. This time, they hated the Wahuang clan to the core. She had gone too far. Flustered and exasperated, purple-browed Daozu said in a ferocious voice, "Why not choose a good day? Today, right now. Confer the title of deity. Confer the title of deity. Quickly choose the deity position, and then..." The 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs glowed brightly, and the collapsed Daoyuan palace was restored to its original state, as if nothing had happened. Chapter 11:15. The sky above Panga continent was right above Liangzhu. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs were fully arrayed, and with all their disciples, they slowly descended from the sky. The chanting of Buddhist and Taoist scriptures resounded through the heaven and earth. Golden light and purple mist illuminated the world, while countless immortals and Buddhas, clad in their most gorgeous outfits, radiated a vast amount of bright light, and wielded their most dazzling magical treasures and flying swords as they descended from the sky. Liu Bang and his courtiers greeted the arrival of the top echelons of the 2 sects respectfully. He knew that the grand plan of investiture prepared by the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs would come to an end today. But Liu Bang was extremely anxious. What should he do when the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs were about to become gods? He had lost contact with Huan Yen again. Huan Yen had been lurking next to esteemed Shouzhua, but last night, the boundless sword beams had killed all the cultivators in Yuxiong Plain. Perhaps she had also been accidentally injured by the sword beams. Perhaps he was still recuperating in some remote valley. Without his guidance, Liu Bang did not know what to do for a while. Things had developed too fast. Before Liu Bang had time to use all kinds of calculations and schemes, and before his other 8 doppelgangers could make a move, the Great War of Gods investiture hosted by the Buddhist League and the Taoist League had come to an end. With Buddha and Daozu personally coming to Panga continent to preside over the investiture ceremony, no matter how bold Liu Bang was, he would not dare to come out and make trouble at this time. Gritting his teeth, Liu Bang put on a big smile and greeted the descending 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs with great devotion. No matter what, he had at least obtained the title of human emperor, which gave him a high position in the 3 realms. When he had gathered the fortune of the human race and the immeasurable virtues of the human race, he would have a chance to fuse with the Tao, and when that time came, it's a pity that I don't know where the soul fixation pearl is. Liu Bang gnashed his teeth and swore in his heart. He must tear Wu Qi into pieces. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs arrived on Pangu continent with their disciples. They were in a bad mood, and they did not even bother to talk nonsense. They did not even give Liu Bang a second glance, and they went straight to the investiture of the gods. He couldn't even be bothered to prepare any sacrificial rituals or sacrificial altars. There were 16 Tao integration stage sages here, so what was the point of doing all that? The huge divine seal decree floated in midair, supported by the dazzling divine seal decree in a radius of 10,000 miles. With a wave of his hand, Purple Eyebrows Daozu took out the god-striking whip that was specially used for the divine seal decree. As soon as the whip appeared, the surrounding sky was suddenly plunged into darkness. The sun and the moon hung high in the sky, but they were dim. Countless stars twinkled in the void, but there was no light at all. The sun and the moon were shining high in the sky, and there were billions of stars in the sky, but there was no light at all. Except for the flames emitted by the almighty experts of the two sects, the rest of the world was in complete darkness. As soon as the god-striking whip appeared, the laws of heavenly Tao in the void suddenly trembled, and all the living beings in Pangu world felt a throbbing in their hearts. The almighty experts and countless disciples of the two sects praised in unison, praising Daozu and the Buddhist patriarchs for appointing the gods of the heavenly Tao. From then on, the heavenly Tao was completed, and the laws of heavenly Tao were stabilized. From then on, Pangu world would be clear, and billions of living beings could live and work in peace and contentment, without any more disasters. There was a mountain god to protect the production of the forest, there was a land god to make the land fertile, there was a water god to ensure good weather, and there was a city god to judge the grievances of the world. Billions of deities had their own duties, and all the rules of the world, human relationships, and laws were all supervised by the deities. Holding the whip, Purple Eyebrows looked at Liu Bang first. He narrowed his eyes and stared at Liu Bang for a while, then abruptly said in a deep voice, "Liu Bang, the king of Han, disrespected the Tao of Kings. He colluded with spirit creatures from the outer space and attempted to destroy the great Tao of nature. Therefore, he was deprived of the throne of the human emperor." Liu Bang was delighted, but now he was shocked. He raised his head and looked at Purple Eyebrows in both shock and anger. What was this? Burning the bridge after crossing the river? He, Liu Bang, had always been the one to burn bridges and kill meritorious officials. When had he ever been tormented like this? If it were not for the fact that Liu Bang knew that his cultivation was no match for Purple Eyebrows Daozu, he would have killed Purple Eyebrows Daozu. With a single point of the whip, Liu Bang howled miserably. 9 huge streams of dragon energy flew out from the top of his head, turned into 9 huge dragon balls, and fell into Purple Eyebrows Daozu's hands. Purple Eyebrows Daozu said indifferently, "Zhang Tingyun, you are the chosen human emperor by the Tao of Heaven. Today, with the help of the human emperor's energy and the infinite fortune of the human race, you will rebuild your fleshly body and soul. You will be the human emperor and rule the human race for all eternity." Staring coldly at Liu Bang, Purple Eyebrows Daozu waved his sleeve, and Liu Bang and his loyal subjects were all swept into the air by a gust of wind. The wind wrapped around Liu Bang and the others and slowly flew up. Before long, they were sent into the Daoyuotian palace of Daoyuan. Layers of restrictive spells densely covered their bodies, imprisoning them firmly in the palace of Daoyuan. Purple Eyebrows Daozu was burning the bridge after crossing the river. Not only did he destroy the bridge, but he also burned the wood to make fertilizer. The human emperor appointed by Taoism was Zhang Tingyun, the emperor of the Ling dynasty. Therefore, even though Liu Bang led his people to conquer Dayu's world, Purple Eyebrows Daozu still wanted to confer the title of human emperor on Zhang Tingyun. No matter how strong you were, no matter what your character was, as long as Daozu spoke, even if you were a son of a bitch, you could sit on the throne of the human emperor. Zhang Tingyun's Yuan Ling flew out of the investiture of the gods. Ecstatic, Zhang Tingyun knelt and kowtowed to the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs, shouting their names in awe and trepidation. Purple Eyebrows Daozu did not waste any time. He slapped the 9 dragon balls into Zhang Tingyun's body. Immediately, 9 huge streams of purple and golden dragon energy wheeled wildly over Zhang Tingyun's head. Pangu continent trembled faintly as a vast amount of yellow and black energy gathered from all directions and poured into Zhang Tingyun's body. In just the blink of an eye, under the infusion of the aura of the human emperor and the fortune of the human race, Zhang Tingyun had regathered his fleshly body and immortal soul. He had a crown on his head, a dragon robe on his body, and a pair of shoes on his feet. He stood up proudly, and an immeasurable amount of fate gathered around him. The enormous aura of the Renhuang soared into the sky, and it actually made the clouds of the Buddhist revered ones and the Taoist masters tremble. After Zhang Tingyun regathered his fleshly body and immortal soul and was conferred the title of human emperor, his fleshly body was that of an ordinary human, and there was no more immortal energy in him. But, with the enormous aura of the human emperor and the fortune of the human race, the power he exerted with every move was not inferior to that of any of the Buddhist League and the Tao League. The grandeur and majesty of his aura even exceeded that of the supreme experts of the Buddhist League and the Tao League. A loud rumble rang out in the void as a cloud of purple mist wrapped in a jade seal the size of a baby's head fell rapidly. Zhang Tingyun grabbed the seal instinctively. Immediately, the world around him shook violently. The position of the human emperor in the deity throne of the heavenly Tao of the three realms had been determined, and the heavenly Tao and heavenly secrets that had been in turmoil suddenly became as clear as water. In Empress Wa's palace, Huang clan and the saints of the Covenant Alliance were silently exercising their divine abilities to observe the movements on Pangu continent. When Zhang Tingyun caught the human emperor's seal condensed by the heavenly Tao, Huang clan and the saints of the Covenant Alliance shuddered at the same time, and blood trickled down the corners of their mouths. At the beginning of the investiture of the gods, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs had used their mighty divine abilities to disturb the heavenly Tao, and later, Wu Qi, Huang clan, and the others had joined in as well. Now that the position of the human emperor had been determined, it was as if a huge vortex of the heavenly Tao had suddenly stagnated, and the chaotic vortex quickly became crystal clear. The enormous divine power that the saints had thrown into the heavenly Tao to disturb the heavenly Tao was expelled by the heavenly Tao, and as a result, the Huang clan and the saints of the Covenant Alliance were slightly injured by the backlash of the heavenly Tao. Incredible! Can they really control the heavenly Tao after they become gods? Great Horns sucked in a cold breath and asked subconsciously. Huang clan pointed a finger at the myriad spirit cauldron, and a plume of smoke rose from its mouth, in which countless beams of colorful light were wheeling slowly. These colorful light streams were the manifestations of the great Tao of nature of Pangu world. Before, the swiftly spinning colorful light streams were like a whirlpool in a deep pool, but now they had calmed down, flowing in the mist in an orderly manner. Amidst the endless beams of light, a huge formation that looked like a pyramid gradually took shape. At the very center of the pyramid-shaped magic formation, a bright spot was shining brightly. It was the light emitted by this speck of light that had calmed the chaotic heavenly Tao and restored the heavenly Tao to normal. Even an ordinary gold immortal could calculate many things as long as he knew a little bit of divination. The heavenly Tao is like a chessboard, and the godhood is like a chess piece. Huang clan frowned and sighed. The investiture of the gods of Buddhism and Tao League is to control the chess piece in their hands. It is true that the chessboard is the foundation of the game, but with the rules set by the chessboard, without the chess pieces moving on the chessboard, everything will be in vain. If one can control the chess pieces, the changes of the game will be under the control of the player. With a sneer, Huang clan sighed and said, "If one controls all the chess pieces as long as they are obedient, then, no matter what the rules set by the chessboard are, as long as the chess pieces move at will, they will break the rules of the chessboard and set their own rules." "They are trying to control the heavenly Tao?" Xinyuan asked in a deep voice. Huang clan twitched her mouth and sneered, "Well, they need to have so many obedient chess pieces first." Smiling coldly, Huang clan narrowed her eyes and said in a cold voice, "Now that the chessboard is in my hands, if their chess pieces can't work together, hee." She sneered meaningfully. Xinyuan and Shinnong, the Flame Emperor, laughed out loud at the same time. The saints of the Holy Alliance also laughed. Amidst the smoke puffed out by the Thousand Spirit Cauldron, 6 extremely bright light spots suddenly flickered on top of the giant formation. Zimei Daozu had already conferred the title of 6 Emperors of the Celestial Court as fast as he could. The 6 Emperors were all Taoist sect masters who had just died in battle last night. Huang clan and the other Tao fusing experts felt the air stagnate around them. Originally, they were like fish in the water that could swim freely, but now the water seemed to have frozen, and they felt an ominous pressure. It was as if the water had its own will and was repelling them, the fish that had merged with the water. Interesting. Huang clan laughed. Esteemed Shouzhua has arrived. The 6 emperors of the celestial court have already decided on how to deal with this matter. Chi-Chi looked down. Sure enough, esteemed Shouzhua and the supremacy had arrived at Liangzhu together, and esteemed Shouzhua was chattering nonstop. Chapter 11:16. Reverend Shouzhua and Supremacy Dei rushed to the investiture site together. Supremacy Dei squatted obediently among the Buddhist League's saints and did not say a word, while Reverend Shouzhua shouted in front of the many almighty experts of the Buddhist League and Tao League, "In the name of Daozu, the 9 Daozu once promised me the throne of Celestial Emperor. Why are you going back on your word now?" Purple-browed Daozu was a little embarrassed by Reverend Shouzhua. That day, he had promised Reverend Shouzhua the throne of Celestial Emperor, but that was only because he had no other choice. If he had not wanted to use Great Wu's power to carry out the northern expedition, how could Reverend Shouzhua, who was in charge of Great Wu's politics, get such a great benefit? But now the situation was different. Because the Huang clan had attacked too harshly, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs were a little angry. Even Lu Bang had become the donkey who was killed when he was no longer of use. So, what was Reverend Shouzhua? His value was gone. The Tao League did not lack a Taoist who had broken through to the realm of Tao breaking. In particular, the Tao League had lost more than 30 sect masters last night, and their Yuan Ling was still in the list of investiture of the gods. In this situation, purple-browed Daozu could only confer titles to the disciples who had been lost, and confer the highest and most powerful deity thrones to them. Compared with the trusted disciples of the Daozu, Reverend Shouzhua was nothing. The throne of Celestial Emperor would never fall into his hands. But now that Reverend Shouzhua had spoken about it in front of so many people, purple-browed Daozu was put in a difficult position. After pondering for a long time, he said softly, "Shouzhua, what we said is naturally true. Apart from the 6 celestial emperors, you should be the great celestial emperor, but..." Reverend Shouzhua narrowed his eyes and said with a cold grin, "But what?" Purple-browed Taoist flicked his finger a few times on the whip and told Reverend Shouzhua about his strategy. Now that the 6 celestial emperors had completed the conferment, their Yuan Ling had already merged with the heavenly god position. Even if they wanted to remove him, it would be impossible. However, in order to compensate Lord Shouzhua, in addition to the 6 great celestial emperors of the celestial court, 9 other Daozu jointly issued an edict, declaring Lord Shouzhua to be the 7th great celestial emperor of the celestial court. However, as the great celestial emperor, esteemed Shouzhua, could not intervene in the affairs of the celestial court. He had the authority to inspect the land and the human realm. If he discovered any abnormalities in the land and the human realm, he had the right to request the 6 great celestial emperors of the celestial court to mobilize the gods of various departments to deal with them. Of course, this violet extreme inspiration great celestial emperor was not an empty promise. The 9 Daozu had promised him that he could build his own government and recruit as many immortal soldiers and immortal officials as he wished. To put it bluntly, esteemed Shouzhua did not have a share in the heavenly god position, but the 9 Daozu jointly guaranteed that his power was no less than that of the celestial emperor. Although he could not intervene in the affairs of the celestial court, he could supervise the affairs of the land and the human realm, which was a great power. In particular, he could recruit immortal soldiers and immortal officials at will, which was a very generous treatment. Esteemed Shouzhua was instantly delighted. He could enjoy the practical benefits of being a celestial emperor without being confined by the heavenly god position. Where else could he find such a good thing? Of course, a few years later, he might also be killed after he had outlived his usefulness. For example, the 9 Daozu thought that he had made too many mistakes when he was Violet Extreme Inspiration Great Celestial Emperor, and that he had let down the heaven and the people, so they wanted to remove him from his position. But at that time, would esteemed Shouzhua still give them the chance to burn the bridge after crossing it? Immediately, esteemed Shouzhua bowed deeply to the 9 Daozu and kept praising them for keeping their promises. The 9 Daozu signed a joint decree on the spot, making it clear that esteemed Shouzhua was the 7th great celestial emperor of the celestial court, but he was not in charge of the affairs of the celestial court. He only had the authority to supervise the land and the human realm. As the Violet Extreme Inspiration Great Celestial Emperor, esteemed Shouzhua had great authority. He could supervise the mountain gods, earth gods, and city gods on Pangu continent, as well as the 6 paths of reincarnation in the netherworld, as well as the words and deeds of the Nether Emperor, and control the operation of the netherworld. Not to mention other authorities, when Violet Extreme Inspiration Great Celestial Emperor mentioned that esteemed Shouzhua could supervise the netherworld, the faces of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs turned extremely unsightly at the same time. Buddha Guarding Heart immediately chanted the name of Buddha and said in a deep voice, "Senior brothers, Violet Extreme Inspiration Great Celestial Emperor has the authority to supervise the gods in the human realm, but the netherworld." The hearts of the Buddhist patriarchs were burning with anger. It was already a great disadvantage for the Buddhist League to only control the netherworld among the 3 realms of heaven, earth, and human. Now, when Violet Extreme Inspiration Great Celestial Emperor wanted to use Daozu's decree to let esteemed Shouzhua supervise the operation of the netherworld, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs almost fell out with each other on the spot. Your Dao League has already gained too much of an advantage. You can't go too far. Violet Extreme Inspiration Great Celestial Emperor narrowed his eyes at the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and said nothing. 8 Daozu stood in a straight line behind Daozu. The atmosphere suddenly became extremely strange. Intentionally or unintentionally, many almighty experts of the Buddhist League and Dao League secretly held their most powerful magical treasures in their hands, waiting for Daozu and the Buddhist patriarchs to fight. Sitting among the many Buddhist League saints, Dei Supremacy narrowed his eyes and suddenly laughed. 9 Daozu, this is so unfair. If that Daozu can get the position of Celestial Emperor, why can't I? Speaking of Shouzhua's contributions, could it be that I, Dei, have killed fewer Deu generals along the way than Shouzhua? Rubbing his bald head with his right hand, Dei Supremacy jumped out as if he wanted to see the world in chaos. If esteemed Shouzhua wants to be Celestial Emperor, why can't I? The 9 Daozu frowned, but the 7 Buddhist patriarchs laughed in unison and shouted, "That's great! Since esteemed Shouzhua can be Celestial Emperor, why can't Dei Supremacy? My fellow Taoists, if you can appoint esteemed Shouzhua as Great Celestial Emperor, then why can't the 7 of us make esteemed Shouzhua the Celestial Emperor?" It was a mess, a complete mess. Inside Empress Hua Palace, the Huang clan and the others were rocking back and forth with laughter, watching the struggle for power between the Buddhist League and the Dao League with great pleasure. The 9 Daozu were so angry that they almost vomited blood. If it were not for the fact that this was not the best time to fall out with the Buddhist League, they really wanted to start a war and completely destroy the Buddhist League. Purple-browed Daozu was so angry that his nose was crooked. By appointing esteemed Shouzhua as the 7th Great Celestial Emperor to supervise the Earth realm and the mortal realm, there was no place for him to do that. But the 9 of them had promised to make esteemed Shouzhua the 7th Great Celestial Emperor, so they had no choice but to find a way to fool him first. How long this Great Celestial Emperor could last was up to them. When the conferment of gods was over, they could find a reason to depose esteemed Shouzhua. Of course, the Daozu did mean to make things difficult for esteemed Shouzhua. That was why they gave him the power to supervise the netherworld. But was it necessary for the 7 Buddhist patriarchs to jump out just for this little power? Was it necessary? The overall situation was the most important thing. Did you 7 bald donkeys know what the overall situation was? Pangu was probably hiding in Pangu continent, and there were world breakers lurking in the chaos. If they could not control the entire great Tao of Pangu world, they would all be finished. At such a critical moment, did you 7 bald donkeys really turn against each other for this little power of supervision? Purple-browed Daozu stared angrily at Buddha Shoshin, and the 7 Buddhist patriarchs stared back at the 9 Daozu without showing any sign of weakness. Anyway, The Buddhist patriarchs felt that they could not let Tao League take all the advantages in the conferment of gods this time. Tao League monopolizing the celestial court and the mortal world had already made them angry. It was very unfair, and they were about to jump out and fight for the throne. But now, Tao League had made an inexplicable seventh celestial emperor to supervise the netherworld. Even the Buddhist patriarchs were angry, and they were about to fly into a rage. Seeing the atmosphere between the two sides growing tenser and tenser, esteemed Shoujuo wisely stepped back and hid behind the 9 Daozu. Shaking his big head, Supremacy Daozu gave the 9 Daozu a strange smile and said, "Daozu, please be merciful and make me a celestial emperor too. Hee, I don't want too much power. I just want to supervise everything in the mortal world." Shaking his huge bald head, Supremacy laughed and said, "I know myself very well, and I will never dare to intervene in the affairs of the celestial court. Please rest assured, Daozu." Tao Father Violet Brows frowned, not saying a word. Buddha Shoshin barked coldly, "My 9 senior apprentice brothers, our Buddhist Sangha has suffered such disastrous losses. We didn't foresee this before we came up with this plan. We are not as powerful as Tao League in terms of numbers. We have many disciples, but we only have a few core disciples. Now we have lost half of our disciples, and you are still so harsh and mean. Don't blame us for—" A beam of Buddhist light gushed out from the back of Buddha Shoshin's head, and a complicated wheel rose up with a rumbling sound of Sanskrit. Purple-browed Daozu glanced at the 8 junior brothers behind him, and they quickly exchanged their opinions. Then, they looked up at the direction of the heavens beyond. Purple-browed Daozu sighed and nodded at the 7 Buddhas. Well said. The matter of apatheicizing is very important, and we'd better finish it as soon as possible. If Supremacy Daozu is willing to be the 8th celestial emperor, let him be. His duty will be the same as Shoshin. What do you think?" The Daozu's wishful thinking was in full swing. Esteemed Shoujuo had asked for the position of celestial emperor in front of so many people, which was a great humiliation to the Daozu. Therefore, they arranged a Supremacy Daozu, who had the same power as him, to compete with him, so that he would not be too complacent. As for the matter of Supremacy Daozu supervising the many priesthoods in the human world, these priesthoods were all held by the disciples of Taoism. What big trouble could Supremacy Daozu cause? On the contrary, if esteemed Shoujuo could stir up trouble in the netherworld, it would save the Buddhists from growing in the netherworld. It was a good move to weaken their strength. Immediately, the two sides hit it off. The 7 Buddhas and 9 Taoists issued a decree at the same time. Just like that, Supremacy Daozu and esteemed Shoujuo were conferred the title of Great Celestial Emperor, and they had the power to supervise both the earth realm and the human realm. Unless the 7 Buddhas and 9 Taoists agreed to revoke their power at the same time, no one in the world could shake their power. Both Supremacy Shoujuo and Supremacy Daozu squinted their eyes and laughed. Although the result was not satisfactory, the subtlety was beyond their expectations. After a while, Purple-browed Daozu waved the holy whip and conferred titles to the gods of the celestial court one by one. Just as he began to confer the title of the thunder god of the celestial court, a strange green light suddenly lit up the void around him. A hair as thick as a thumb whistled and pierced the back of purple-browed Daozu. Chapter 11:17. Just now, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs were still at daggers drawn, but as soon as the long hair appeared, they immediately became very tacit. Except for Purple Eyebrow Daozu, who was holding the holy whip, who remained motionless, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs immediately chanted the name of Buddha. The wheel floating behind heart-guarding Buddha's head glowed with a thick bronze halo, firmly protecting Purple Eyebrow Daozu's chest. The other 6 Buddhist patriarchs pressed their palms on the back of heart-guarding Buddha. The power of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs was connected as one, and the light emitted by the wheel suddenly soared 100 times, enveloping the entire city of Liangzhu. Meanwhile, the 8 Daozu roared in unison. In a flash, they arrived above Liangzhu and stood in the positions of the 8 trigrams. Each of them pulled out a long sword that shone with a cold light and a fierce aura. As they raised their hands, the 8 swords flew up into the air and turned into 8 giant swords that were more than 100 miles tall in the blink of an eye. The light of the sun, moon, and stars was absorbed into the long sword, and at the edge of the sword, countless twisting, wriggling talismans could be seen flickering. With an enormous explosion, 16 streaks of sword light shot out from the tip of the sword, following an extremely profound trajectory as they chopped a circle around Violet Brows. The long hair first collided viciously against the azure light unleashed by the 7 Buddha ancestors. The light was shattered, and the wheel was knocked flying into the skies. The long, straight hair began to twist like a startled snake, but the tip of the hair continued to stab relentlessly towards Tao Father Violet Brow's chest. In the blink of an eye, 16 beams of sword light tore through the void silently, spinning and cutting around Purple Eyebrow Daozu 9 times. A series of tearing sounds could be heard as Tao Father Violet Brow's hair was ripped to shreds by the sword light. A startled cry rang out from behind Violet Brow Patriarch a few dozen meters away, and a twisted black figure suddenly appeared. His face was ashen, and he had a hint of green in it. It seemed as though he had just been completely drained of energy by hundreds of women. There was a transparent sword mark on Qian Shou's chest. Just now, a sword chi had pierced through his chest, causing him severe injuries. Not long after, the big wound was healed, but Thousand Head's face looked worse. It was almost translucent. Thousand Head's face looked even worse. It was almost translucent. Thousand Head's face looked even more awful. It was almost translucent. Zimei Daozu waved the God-whipping whip casually, bringing a yellow light down on Qian Shou's head. As the whip lashed out, the entire Pangu world quaked. People who witnessed the whip lashing down felt like they saw countless suns, moons, stars, breezes, drifting clouds, mountains, rivers, flowers, insects, fishes, and all kinds of natural phenomena striking to the thousand-headed man. The 6 celestial emperors of the celestial court had already determined that a single strike from the deity striking whip could draw upon the power of the heavenly Tao. Tao Father Violet Brow's casual strike was already twice as powerful as the full power strike he normally unleashed when controlling a Grand Mist Supreme Treasure. At the first stage of the Tao integration stage, Zimei Daozu's casual strike could double the destructive power. This was simply unheard of. At the very least, if he used the God-whipping whip to deal with the Wahuang clan and the 18 saints of the Holy Alliance, even the Wahuang clan, who had cultivated the Pangu true body, would not dare to take Zimei Daozu's strike head-on. The power of this whip was enough to completely annihilate the physical body of a Tao integration stage mighty figure, and even their divine sense might be severely injured. All the Tao integration stage saints in the Empress Hua Palace who witnessed this whip cried out in alarm at the same time. Thousand-headed man, who bore the brunt of this whip, was so frightened that he cried out involuntarily, "What a ruthless method! Heh! I can't let you confer the deity thrones no matter what. Spirit puppet, what are you waiting for?" A silver spiritual light suddenly appeared above thousand-headed man's head. Zimei Daozu's powerful whip lashed down solidly on the head of this silver light. It was a silvery figure that looked as if it was cast from mercury. There was not a single hair on his body, and his body was extremely clean and smooth, as if he could really be used as a mirror. The God-whipping whip lashed down, and his body exploded into countless bean-sized silver droplets that splashed in all directions. However, after flying less than 1,000 feet away, these tiny silver droplets quickly flew back through the air. With a whistling sound, these tiny silver droplets quickly fused into one and reformed into the strange humanoid figure called Spirit Puppet. Zimei Daozu put away the God-whipping whip, gasped, and shouted in a low voice, "Spirit Puppet, the world breaker? Aren't you supposed to be imprisoned in the raging thunder nether abyss?" Thousand-headed man chuckled. He shook his head gently, and countless slender strands of hair floated in the air behind his head, wriggling like countless poisonous snakes. He laughed shrilly and said, "Of course I was the one who went to release him. Hee, I didn't expect this world to have the power to fight back. Last time, who was it that almost completely annihilated this body of mine and almost sent me back to that damned soul-storing coffin?" The 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs looked cautiously at thousand-headed man and spirit puppet, but no one answered his question. Of course, they would not tell thousand-headed that it was very likely that Pangu himself had sent him flying. Anyway, if it was not the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs, they would not bother to answer any questions. Thousand-headed squinted at the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. He licked his lips greedily and murmured in a low voice, "What a fragrant and sweet flesh. Although you are a little weak, you have your strengths. Wait until I devour your bodies, suck your souls dry, and destroy this damn small world. Then, I'll take your original spirits as my collection. That's really a wonderful thing." The 7 Buddhist patriarchs released the wheel to protect themselves, not daring to be careless. The 7 of them had once fought with thousand-headed in the chaos, and they had suffered a great loss. Just now, the 7 of them had joined forces to release the wheel to protect Zi Mei Daozu, but it was defeated by thousand-headed with just a strand of his hair. Thousand-headed's strength seemed to have improved a little, which made them even more cautious. The 8 Daozu guarded the positions of the 8 trigrams, wholeheartedly presiding over the sword formation. 16 sword lights flew across space. They could strike thousand-headed and the spirit puppet at any time. The 8 Daozu knew that no matter how deadly a strike was, it was useless against the break-world beings. They could only keep hurting the break-world beings and weaken their power. Then they could suppress them again. The Daozu's faces looked conflicted. Releasing thousand-headed was just one step in the Daozu's plan. They wanted to use thousand-headed to threaten the Buddhas and scare the Wahuang clan into giving in. To be honest, if it was just thousand-headed, the Daozu were confident they could seal him again. After all, the 9 Daozu's power was not like the chaos demon gods in the chaos of the past. Even Pangu, who led the chaos demon gods to fight the break-world beings, was not as strong as any of the Daozu. Thousand-headed had released the spirit puppet, which was also suppressed. That gave them a headache. The spirit puppet was like sticky candy that could not be killed. In a fight, it was more difficult to deal with than thousand-headed and Huan Yen. Of course, thousand-headed and the spirit puppet's power had not recovered yet. Even if they worked together, the 9 Daozu would only need to wait until the god sealing ceremony was complete. Then, they could use Pangu's sky power to suppress them. But thousand-headed came at the wrong time. He and the spirit puppet came here before the god sealing ceremony was complete. That was going to be troublesome. Under the threat of 2 break-world beings, the 9 Daozu did not dare focus on the god sealing ceremony. The 7 Buddhas had the power to block the attacks of 2 break-world beings, but how could they entrust their own safety to the 7 old bald thieves? The Daozu were not that stupid. If they really focused on the god sealing ceremony and relied on the 7 Buddhas to protect themselves, thousand-headed and the spirit puppet could easily injure the 7 Buddhas. Then, they could take the opportunity to devour the 9 Daozu brothers. The 7 Buddhas and the 9 Taoists focused on thousand-headed and the spirit puppet. The powerful beings from the Tao League and the Buddhism League also focused on the 2 dangerous and scary enemies. The powerful beings from the 2 Taoists and the 2 Taoists had prepared their strongest defensive treasures and held their most lethal ones in their hands. As long as their masters gave the order, over 100 Tao breaking and thousands of Tao reasoning realm powerful beings from the Buddhism League and the Tao League could join hands and crush thousand-headed and the spirit puppet. Among everyone present, only the master and Shou Zhuo esteemed were rolling their eyes. They did not pay attention to what was happening. Thousand-headed and the spirit puppet laughed coldly. Their laughter was hoarse, unpleasant and bone-piercingly cold. It made the hair of the powerful beings from the Tao League and the Buddhism League stand on end. Just as everyone's attention was drawn to them, a tiny watermark was rapidly moving across the ground. The black watermark was tens of thousands of times thinner than a strand of hair, but it was shockingly long. It moved as fast as a stream of light and quickly reached the bottom of a Buddhist League venerable. This watermark was like a venomous snake that was about to devour someone. It pierced upwards at lightning speed, fiercely stabbing into the tailbone of the world venerable. The extremely long watermark instantly entered the venerable's body, causing him to stiffen and his expression to change. The spinning lotus swastika in his eyes paused for a moment before returning to normal. 2 watermarks flowed out from the Venerable's ankles and quickly spread toward the powerful beings from the Buddhist League on both sides. In just a few breaths' time, 7 Venerables, 63 ancient Buddhas, and 38 Buddhas had their bodies invaded by the watermarks. The watermark seemed to have lost its sense of measure. One of its watermarks shot straight toward the E-Master. The black watermark was like a cobra as it pierced towards the tailbone of the great E-Venerable. The E-Supremacy, who was observing his surroundings with shifty eyes, had a change of expression. He abruptly pressed his palm downwards. With a loud clang, golden light shot out from the great E-Supremacy's tailbone like a rocket shooting into the sky. The powerful impact sent the great E-Supremacy hundreds of feet into the air. His tailbone was in so much pain that it felt like it was struck by lightning, but the watermark was so dizzy that it failed to stab into his body, which was extraordinarily tough. The E threw his head back and roared furiously, "Which despicable villain is this? How dare you attack my private part?" The 7 Buddhas and 9 Taoists turned around at the same time and saw the black watermark that disappeared in a flash. The faces of the 7 Buddhas fell instantly. "Huan Yen, you despicable villain! How many of our disciples have you harmed?" They roared at the same time. 1,000 heads and spirit puppet transformed into a gust of wind and drifted away at the same time. Only their strange laughter could be heard. "I won't rest until I die. I won't rest until I die. This world of yours must be destroyed. Wait quietly, wait for the day your soul disappears." Chapter 11:18. Qian Shou and Huan Yen vanished without a trace, while the bizarre water trail let out a wild, ferocious laugh. Then, it darted toward the crotch of an Arhat who was closest to it. The Arhat let out a terrified roar, then his body stiffened, and in the blink of an eye, a bizarre smile appeared on his face. The Arhat let out a few hissing laughs, then said in a low voice, "Old Baldies, tell me, how many of your disciples are clones of me, Huan Yen? Hee, come on, come and destroy this clone of mine. But, if you can destroy one of my clones, can you destroy the thousands of clones I've left among all your disciples?" The faces of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs turned extremely unsightly. The 9 Daozu retracted their sword formation and unleashed a great sheet of golden light and purple mist to protect all their disciples. The faces of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs twitched, looking 100 times uglier than a filial grandson who had lost his parents. The water trail came from one of the Buddhist disciples, so it was obvious that many of them had become Huan Yan's clones. The Buddhas, who were usually wise and decisive, had their minds completely blank. They stared in astonishment at the many disciples of the Buddhist League, who had the same ugly expressions on their faces. Their bodies were trembling like old men in their twilight years, and they looked so pitiful. Anyone who was infected by Huan Yen would have their soul and primordial spirit completely devoured by Huan Yen. Then Huan Yen would secrete a new soul and primordial spirit. However, it would no longer be the original Buddhist disciple, but a clone of Huan Yen. However, Huan Yen had such a terrifying innate divine ability. After he devoured someone's soul, Yuan Ling, he would obtain all the memories of that person. The appearance of his clone would be no different from the original person. Years ago, before Pangu created the world, Huan Yen had already caused great casualties to the Chaos Fiend gods. Huan Yen had an extremely strong desire for the souls of living beings and Yuan Ling. He had once hunted everywhere in the primal chaos and devoured the souls of living beings crazily to develop clones. Later on, one of the Chaos Fiend Celestials, a powerful Fiend Celestial who was proficient in soul control and manipulation, took action. He used a powerful Dharma artifact he found in a certain ruin in the Chaos world that specifically targeted souls. Finally, he lured out all of Huan Yan's avatars and killed them. In the end, many Fiend Celestials joined forces to suppress Huan Yen. However, the Fiend Celestial who had subdued Huan Yen had already died in the scheme of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. Not only that, he had died without leaving behind even his bones. Several of his direct descendants had also been wiped out by the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. The powerful instrument that was specially used to deal with souls was also missing in the fierce battle. How could the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Taoist priests find such a natural enemy with a face illusion? Some of the Buddhist disciples must have become Huan Yan's doppelgangers, but how many doppelgangers did he possess? 100? Did he infect ordinary arhats and bodhisattvas, or Buddhas whose loss would make the 7 Buddhist patriarchs grieve? Could he have even infected the revered ones? The hearts of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs were bleeding. The Wahuang clan's ambush had just cost them dozens of revered ones, and now, another batch of elite disciples might have been infected by Huan Yan. It was like carving out a piece of flesh from their hearts. The 9 Daozu's expressions were unsightly as well. Purple-browed Daozu said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoists, please decide quickly what to do. If the Buddhist League can't tell if someone has been infected by Huan Yan," Buddha guarding heart laughed coldly and scolded in a low voice, "Are we going to kill all of these disciples just because we can't tell if they have been infected by Huan Yan? Huan Yan, tell me the truth. Have you infected any of the Tao League's disciples?" The arhat who was possessed by Huan Yan laughed strangely and said, "Yes, of course. How could there not be any? Not only have some of the Tao League's disciples become my clones, but there are also a few great sect leaders among them. For example, Grand Magus Lao Ai, you like to wear red pants, don't you?" Lao Ai's face turned pale with fear. "Master," he cried out hastily, "I am not possessed by that fiend." The 9 Tao fathers glanced suspiciously at Swanee. Violet Brows didn't say a single word, then casually lashed out with his whip, smashing it against Swanee's head. Lao Ai gave a muffled grunt as he was knocked unconscious by the whip. Tao Father Longbrows casually pointed his finger out, sending out a strand of purple energy that was as thin as gossamer threads into Tao Father by Mion's 7 apertures. In the blink of an eye, it had circulated through all the vital acupoints in his body, completely sealing off all his cultivation base. Dei, who was standing off to the side and rubbing his tailbone with all his might, suddenly laughed and said, "Why are you making everyone so anxious? Why don't you just pull down your pants and look at the tailbone of those who are possessed and those who are not? Those with scars on their tailbones must have just been possessed. As for those without scars..." Before Dei could finish his words, the expression of the arhat who was possessed by Huan Yan changed abruptly. Among the Buddhist disciples, many revered ones, ancient Buddhas, and Buddhas who were turned into clones by Huan Yan trembled slightly, and their Buddhist light shone brightly at the same time. The brightness of the Buddha's halo on the surface of their bodies was extremely low. It was like the flickering light of a firefly's tail under the sun. It was simply insignificant. But in the eyes of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs, this tiny fluctuation of Buddhist energy was even more striking than 1,000 suns suddenly appearing in the dark night. They attacked at the same time. Immense immortal energy and Buddhist energy turned into invisible chains, sealing these revered ones who had Buddhist energy ripples in their bodies. The arhat that was infected by Huan Yan roared in anger, "Great E-Supremacy, I, Huan Yan, will fight you to the death." The E-Supremacy rubbed his tailbone and sneered as he gave the arhat a huge middle finger. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs had a strange expression on their faces. The problem that gave them such a headache was solved with just a few words from Dei. Daozu and Buddhas felt a little embarrassed, but at the same time, they heaved a long sigh of relief. Just now, their divine senses had swept across the many Buddhist and Taoist disciples present. Sure enough, there was a nearly invisible black spot on the tailbone of those who had experienced a strange change in their Buddhist energy. They had used their Buddhist energy to heal this black spot. Tao Father Violet Brow grinned as he glanced at the Grand E-Exalt, then laughed dryly. "Grand E-Exalt, your body truly is powerful. If it wasn't for the fact that Huan Yan chose the wrong person, she probably would have already succeeded on your body. No one would know how she managed to invade the bodies of these Buddhist disciples." The arhat who was possessed by Huan Yan trembled with anger. There were so many powerful clones, And he didn't even have the time to absorb their powerful essences into his body. If he could replenish the essences of so many clones, he could recover at least half of his cultivation base when he destroyed the sacred world. Although it was only half of his cultivation base, it was more than enough to wreak havoc in Pangu world. He hated it. Never in his dreams did he expect to encounter a freak like Dei Supremacy. How do you think his tailbone was born? Huan Yen had never failed in invading others' tailbones in all these years. How could there be such a freak like the Great E Supremacy? His tailbone was actually so tough that not only did Huan Yen fail to enter his body, he even managed to expose the crux of the matter, causing all of his clones to be destroyed. Huan Yen was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood. If his cultivation base was higher and he hadn't used up so much essence, he would have been able to invade Dei Supremacy's body no matter how tough it was. However, Huan Yen had worked hard for nothing. Not only did he not benefit from the clone's essences, but he also lost a part of his main body's essence. After all, controlling so many clones consumed his main body's essence. Seeing the Arhat's exasperated look, Dei Supremacy laughed out loud. Hee, we don't have to be afraid of this guy anymore. When we meditate, we'll find a sturdy treasure to cushion our buttocks. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs didn't know whether to laugh or cry at Dei Supremacy's words. If Huan Yen could withstand it so easily, how could he have lost so many chaos demon gods back then? Huan Yen had chosen the wrong target this time and suffered a great loss for no reason. The 9 Daozu mumbled softly. 1,000 heads and spirit puppets had disappeared without a trace. Huan Yen had been imprisoned, so they had to finish the great god investiture ceremony as soon as possible. The expressions of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs were extremely ugly. They looked at the Buddhist disciples who had black spots on their tailbones. It was clear that Huan Yen had succeeded in getting her hands on them. It was as though 10,000 mice were grabbing onto their hearts and gnawing on them. It was an indescribable pain. Another batch of core disciples who had worked so hard to protect during the apocalypse of heaven and earth had fallen. What a pity for their cultivation bases. Sighing, Buddha Guardian will slammed his palm down. The infected revered era, ancient Buddhist patriarchs, and Buddhas turned into ashes at the same time. At the same time, hundreds of fist-sized relics flew out of their bodies. Buddha Guardian will pondered for a moment, then threw all the relics to Dei Supremacy without saying a word. Clearly, Dei Supremacy had exposed Huan Yan's scheme with a single sentence. These relics were his reward. All the Buddhist disciples present cried out the name of Buddha at the same time, and some of their masters and seniors who had just been infected burst into tears. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs surrounded the imprisoned Arhat with hostile expressions. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs chanted the name of Buddha while the 9 Daozu sneered. The Arhat sighed softly, then shook his head and said, "Good, good, good. Last night, the disciple of great Taoist Bai, whom I possessed, was killed by a sword beam. I was planning to reap some benefits today, but I didn't expect to be seen by that fool again. But next time, there won't be such a good thing." The Arhat golden body quickly disintegrated into a puddle of sticky black liquid. Huan Yan's voice came from afar. "Next time, I'll be fully prepared. This world is going to collapse and you can't stop it." Her tone changed, becoming extremely ferocious. "Hey, Dei Supremacy, I'll definitely turn you into my clone next time. Cultivate well. I'm waiting to slowly enjoy your essence chi. All of you must be on guard against me at all times. Who knows, one of you might become my clone next time." The expressions of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs, as well as all the divine gods present, fell. Huan Yan's departure would bring them endless troubles in the future. Even if it were a Tao-breaking expert who could be on guard against thieves all day long. Chapter 11:19. Back on Panga continent, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs had banished 1,000 heads, Ling Wu and Huan Yen, the 3 breakers, and continued with the investiture of the gods. There were so many gods of the 3 realms that needed to be conferred, and so many positions that needed to be coordinated, as well as unusual beings such as supremacy and esteemed Shoujua. Without 3 to 5 months, how could the gods of the 3 realms be conferred? The 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs did not have the energy to pay attention to what was happening in other places, and they even forgot about the Daoyuotian palace of Tao origin, the home of the 9 Daozu. Above the 33 heavens, the supreme Daoyuotian. Bright light filled every corner of this boundless heavenly realm, and the vast and ancient palace of Tao origin was supported by a boundless purple mist. In front of the tall palace gate stood a pair of Taoist boys and girls. The boy was dressed in a moon-white robe, while the girl in a pink one. Both of them were full of energy, and although they were dressed like Taoist boys, their cultivation bases were at the peak of Gold Immortal Realm. The boy's name was Xian, and the girl's name was Yu. Both of them were taken in by Daozu when he founded the Tao League. Xian was a piece of jade, and Yu's origin was even stranger. She was actually a feather with the strongest intelligence of a chaotic divine bird. Both of them had a very strange background, and they were in the business of receiving guests in the palace of Tao origin. Therefore, after so many years and being considered as Daozu's close subordinates, their cultivation bases and magic power had stagnated after they reached the peak of Gold Immortal Realm. The 9 Daozu had brought all the almighty experts of the Tao League to Pangu continent for the investiture of the gods. Only a few servants were left in the palace of Tao origin. Xian and Yu were happy and unfettered. Sitting on the threshold with their legs crossed, they were happily discussing the prosperity of the Tao League after the investiture. In terms of seniority, they were older than many of Daozu's first disciples, and the 2 little Taoists were also full of affection for the Tao League. When it came to the glorious future of the Tao sect, both of them were overjoyed, beaming with joy. While they were chatting happily, a cold wind suddenly blew over. The boundless purple qi that supported the Tao Yuan Palace suddenly dimmed, and the huge Tao Yuan Palace trembled a few times. The 2 little Taoists shivered and looked up in panic, just in time to see 3 evil-looking men standing in front of them. In the middle was an evil man with a pale face that was almost transparent. Behind his head, there were many long strands of hair dancing. The strands of hair piled up together like a bunch of wriggling poisonous snakes. It was World Breaker 1,000 Heads. His forte lay in sucking people's blood essence. Aside from Tao integration stage sages, anyone who was struck by his hair could have their blood essence sucked dry and perish. On the left side of 1,000 Head was a silver-white man. He looked like a handsome man, but he was completely naked. He did not even have a single strand of hair on his body. That was the spirit puppet, a world breaker. His god powers were weird. No matter what kind of god power or flying sword treasures you used, it was hard to hurt his body. Even if you broke him into countless little droplets, he would still recover. Spirit Puppet had a god power that could change. He was good at turning into all kinds of flying sword treasures. As long as it was a treasure that had hurt him once, he could turn it back into the exact same thing. It was very powerful. The face to the right of 1,000 Heads was covered in a gray mist. It was blurry and the face could not be seen. That was Huan Yen. He was good at controlling the soul of Yuan Ling. He loved controlling countless clones to stir up fights. Among the 13 world breakers, Huan Yen did not kill many people. It was only a fraction of 1,000 Heads, but the number of people who died because of him was 10,000 times more than the number of people 1,000 Heads and the other world breakers had killed. Xian and Feather looked at the 3 world breakers in shock. They could feel the evil, cold air coming off of them. Xian trembled and said, "3 friends? No, seniors? Can I ask why you have come to Tao Yuan Palace? The 9 old men are out on business. There is no one in the palace." 1,000 Head pursed his lips into a strange smile. He slowly bent down and pinched Xianfen's fair and tender cheeks. He said softly, "What an honest child. Sai, I've discovered that ever since I went on a killing spree in the saints' world, I've become especially fond of slowly torturing these handsome and good-looking children to death. Can the 2 of you give me some time?" Before his voice trailed off, Feather raised a crimson flying sword. It was like a wave of water, and it was going to stab 1,000 Heads' ribs. The flying sword pierced through 1,000 Heads' body and came out the other side of his body. Feather shouted, What kind of monster is this? How dare you come to Dao Yuan Palace and cause trouble? Brother, are you not going to sound the alarm? When the old man left the palace, he set up a sky restriction. How can an outsider come in? Xian, who was being pinched by 1,000 heads, was shocked. He performed a hand sign and was going to sound the alarm. Qian Shou's face darkened. Countless strands of hair behind his head suddenly pierced forward with an ear-piercing sound. Xian Shou's small body was suddenly covered in dense black hair. His small body suddenly withered. Not long after, there was only a piece of human skin left. It floated to the ground. Seeing his friend of many years die, Feathers screamed. The crimson flying sword was going to stab 1,000 heads. 1,000 heads shook his head. Qian Shou shook his head and allowed the flying sword to randomly stab his body. He gently reached out to hold Feather's little face and said in an extremely gentle voice, "What a cute little girl. Unfortunately, I'm not very interested in women. If Yang Xian was here, he would have a lot of fun. Little girl, I'm afraid you would be tormented by him for a long time." Feather's expression changed. Before she could escape, Huan Yan's face shrouded in gray mist suddenly flashed with 2 balls of deep light. Feather accidentally saw the 2 balls of light. She was stunned, and her hands moved uncontrollably. Slowly, she reached out her hand and grabbed her own neck. Then she tore open her own neck and chest, crushing all her internal organs, blood vessels, meridians. Only then did she poke her finger into the space between her eyebrows, smashing her immortal soul into pieces. So beautiful! Huan Yan chuckled softly. Such a beautiful face and such a hideous, mangled body. Beautiful to the extreme. Countless strands of hair shot out from 1,000 heads back and wrapped around Feather's body. In the blink of an eye, all her blood essence was drained. 1,000 heads sighed and said, "You've wasted at least 60% of your energy essence. Why bother?" The spirit puppet snorted coldly and said discontentedly, "Cut the crap. We're here to kill people. Let's just kill our way in." With a sway of his body, the spirit puppet suddenly disintegrated into countless silver liquid beads. The dense liquid beads rolled forward and quickly seeped into the palace of Dao Origin. As the headquarters of Dao League, the palace of Dao Origin had been set up by the 9 Daozu with countless formations and restrictive spells. But in front of the spiritual puppet, these arrays and restrictions were useless. Like flowing mercury, the liquid droplets invaded the palace of Dao Origin, penetrated into the core of these arrays and restrictive spells, and pulled out all the immortal stones, energy stones, and all the magical treasures that were used to guard the bases of these arrays and restrictive spells. As I expected, the formations used by these people are not beyond the range of the formations used by the sages in the sacred world. It is too easy to break these formations and restrictive spells. It only took the spirit puppet the time to finish a pot of tea to completely destroy all the formations and restrictive spells in the dozens of courtyards of the palace of Dao Origin. He sneered and criticized the Daozu's formations. After that, countless liquid beads flowed back and reformed into his body. While stroking a strand of hair, 1,000 heads laughed sinisterly and said, "Of course. All the living beings in this world are merely the spiritual projections of those powerful living beings in the sacred world after they were destroyed. All their understandings of the heavenly Tao came from those living beings in the sacred world. How can their knowledge and understanding surpass those dead ghosts of the saints' world?" Taking a deep breath, 1,000 heads said in an intoxicated tone, "I can smell the fragrance of flesh and blood. It's sweet and rich, and I'm getting excited." Huan Yan giggled and said, "The flesh and blood are yours, but the soul, Yuan Ling, is mine. Spirit puppet, go around and kill all the living beings here, except for the few we need." 1,000 heads gave a few strange laughs. Countless strands of hair shot out from the back of his head and pierced in all directions. In the blink of an eye, the palace of Dao Origin was wrapped up by layers of hair. With a sway of his body, Huan Yan transformed into countless strange black water streaks that pierced in all directions. After that, miserable howls of terror rang out everywhere in the palace of Dao Origin. The spirit puppet snorted disapprovingly. His body disintegrated once again, but this time, he did not transform into countless liquid beads. Instead, he transformed into several thousand 3-feet-long whips, lashing them in all directions while glowing with a bright yellow light. As the spirit puppet unleashed its full power, the palaces and pavilions in the Palace of Tao Origin collapsed one after another. The Taoists who were hiding in these palaces and pavilions were all smashed to pieces by the whips. Qian Shou's hair absorbed the blood and flesh of the dead Taoists to its heart's content, while Huan Yen happily absorbed the souls of the dead. The Taoists who worked in the Palace of Tao Origin were at least golden immortals. In the huge Palace of Tao Origin, there were more than 100,000 Taoists who worked in the Palace of Tao Origin, such as those who lit fires, carried water, planted herbs, concocted pills, washed and cleaned, brewed tea, and guarded the door. All the Taoists were killed by the spirit puppet. Thousand Heads and Huan Yen absorbed the souls without restraint, and their faces quickly turned much better. As they killed and devoured, the three of them gradually arrived at the backyard of the Palace of Tao Origin. In a great hall in the backyard, Liu Bang, Xiao He, Han Xian, and a group of his trusted subordinates were being suppressed by a spirit talisman. Seeing Huan Yen and the other two walk into the hall, Liu Bang hurriedly shouted, "Master, save me! Master, save me!" Huan Yen let out a few weird laughs. He shook his head and softly scolded them for being trash. Then he looked at the soul puppet. The spirit puppet's body shook, and dozens of liquid beads flew out from its body. They circled around the spirit talisman a few times and destroyed it. 15 minutes later, the Palace of Tao Origin had become a land of death. Thousand Heads and the other two led Liu Bang and the rest out of the Palace of Tao Origin. The spirit puppet casually shot out a silver light, and the Palace of Tao Origin silently collapsed. In the blink of an eye, it turned into countless yellow sand and dust that scattered with the wind. Chapter 1120. Outside the chaos, amidst the nebula, Wu Qi and his company stood on the back of 9 tails, looking at the extraordinarily beautiful starry sky with a smile on their faces. The planet where Carefree Heavenly Realm was located had been driven far away by the Stardust Tide, and it was now covered with huge mushrooms. Furthermore, after being trained by Wu Qi, these mushrooms had barely formed sentience, and were branded with a spiritual mark by Wu Qi. They had become the best gatekeepers of Carefree Heavenly Realm. Who would have thought that such a tiny Carefree Heavenly Realm was hiding in the boundless nebula outside the chaos? Let's go back and find the ancient sacred palace. Wu Qi waved his hand and laughed heroically. Our foundation is here. Even if Pangu World is destroyed, it has nothing to do with us. Whether we can eat and drink well in the ancient sacred palace or be a coward, it all depends on our luck. After a long time of work, Wu Qi had finally gained complete control of Carefree Heavenly Realm. Ordinary humans, longbow people, heavenly ghosts, and the dragons brought by Ao Buzan had each occupied a vast and fertile land in Carefree Heavenly Realm. The Underhand sect became the only immortal sect in Carefree Celestial Realm, and those demons who used to recite poems and compose essays, as well as the arts of zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, had all become disciples of the Underhand sect. An old Taoist, clad in a green Taoist robe and a large overcoat woven from white crane feathers, stood in front of Wu Qi. His face was simple and unsophisticated, and he was shrouded in a clear mist. He bowed deeply to Wu Qi and said, "Just go. With me in charge of Carefree Heavenly Realm, nothing will go wrong." This old Taoist was a new incarnation of Wu Qi, apart from Dei Supremacy and Reverend Shoujua. Wu Qi called him Recluse Carefree, and from now on, everything in Carefree Heavenly Realm would be managed by him. Hermit Carefree's cultivation base was almost the same as Wu Qi's, but his magical power was much weaker. His magical power was about the same as that of a 9th-tier primordial immortal who had just stepped into the realm of Tao reasoning, which made him the weakest among all the supreme experts. However, Carefree Sky Realm did not have any natural or man-made disasters. If Carefree Sky Realm was given enough time, he would be able to slowly cultivate his magic power-up. There were countless natural treasures in Carefree Heaven Realm. The White Rat Demon had harmed too many ancient almighty beings in the past, but now, they had all fallen into Carefree's hands. Wu Qi left behind a clone to guard the Carefree Heavenly Realm, so he naturally had nothing to worry about. But as he was going to the chaotic world to do all kinds of dangerous things, he could not give him too much of his magic power. So, he could only give him the magic power equivalent to a 9th-tier primordial immortal, which was more than enough to deal with all kinds of things in Carefree Heavenly Realm. After all, the cultivation base of a peak-level Dao breaking expert was more than enough to kill any Dao reasoning expert, even if he only had the magic power of a 9th-tier primordial expert. Slapping Carefree on the shoulder, Wu Qi gave a long roar and stomped heavily on Ninetails' back. Ninetails, who had been eating and drinking happily in Carefree Heavenly Realm these days, transformed into a beam of light and sped away, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Carefree bowed deeply in the direction where Wu Qi had gone, then straightened his body, narrowed his eyes, and said in a deep voice, "Pass down my decree. From today on, all the gods and demons of Carefree Heavenly Realm are to cultivate in seclusion. Do not waste any time, and try your best to improve your cultivation base and magic power. Every year, I will give a sermon and teach them the supreme great Tao. Those who have made the most progress in their cultivation within a year will be rewarded with all kinds of rewards." The few disciples of Underhand sect standing beside Carefree cupped their fists and bowed respectfully, then disappeared into the stardust together with Carefree. The planet where Carefree Heavenly Realm was located had been driven far away by the stardust. If Carefree did not catch up with it, it would take him a long time to find Carefree Heavenly Realm. Wu Qi and his company returned the way they came. Through the natural formation formed by the 5 black Death Stars, they returned to the chaos. He was not in a hurry to return to Pangu World. Instead, he brought them back to the chaos. Dei Reverend and Reverend Shojua had been maintaining a spiritual connection with him all the time. Pangu World was in a great mess now. The Palace of Dao Origin had been torn down, and the 9 Daozu were hunting down the Divine Breakers with shining swords in their hands. He was not in the mood to join in the fun. Ji Hao told Princess Zhonglu and the others about what had happened in Pangu World. They all laughed out loud, gloating over the disaster that happened to Buddhism and Tao. Qixia sighed as she laughed. It was a pity that she was not in Pangu World. Otherwise, she would have fought against Thousand Head and the other World Breakers. She wanted to see who was stronger, the World Breakers, or she, the formless Sky Devil ancestor, who was fiercer. Chatting and laughing along the way, they had long entered a remote area in the chaos. Back then, Pangu created the world, and this was the place where chaos monsters often appeared. In Wu Qi's previous life, Yuan Ling was familiar with this place. In other words, Pangu created a world in the place where chaos monsters lived. This was the reason why chaos monsters often visited Pangu World after it was created. However, the place Wu Qi and his people entered was a remote area in the chaos. This place didn't produce anything, nor did it have any living creatures. Back in the ancient time, no chaos monsters were willing to wander in this place. This place was filled with violent primal chaos auras, extremely unstable chaos stars, and countless strange and dangerous places. Along the way, Wu Qi and his people encountered at least 30 chaos galaxies that were forming in the chaos. However, these galaxies, which had been forming for countless eras and were about to be formed, were immediately blown up by chaos powers that came from an unknown source. These billions of miles in diameter chaos stars, which were tens of thousands of times larger than the stars in Pangu World, exploded. Once they exploded, the power generated by the explosion was great enough to destroy the entire chaos space, which was tens of millions of times larger than the diameter of a star. Wu Qi and his people encountered over 30 exploding chaos galaxies like this on the way. The explosive waves generated by the explosions were countless times more terrifying than the most powerful thunder magic of Wu Qi and his people. Every time, Wu Qi and his people would be tortured to death. The few weakest ones would have died long ago if Wu Qi hadn't risked his life to save them. Dangerous, This is too fucking dangerous. While gasping for air, Ao Buzan grimaced in pain as he smeared a bottle of disinfectant powder on a foot-wide wound on his chest. A faint layer of black flame lingered on the bloody wound. The sticky flame looked like melted glass, quietly burning on Ao Buzan's muscles. A strange aroma of grilled meat suffused the air. Goldhorn, Silverhorn, and Catfish were drooling and twitching their noses, greedily staring at the few pieces of dragon meat on Ao Buzan's chest, which were obviously cooked. Just now, they narrowly avoided the explosion of a star, but the terrible shockwave sent them flying far away. They felt the sky was spinning, and even Wu Qi had no idea where he was. Right at that moment, a tiny meteor the size of a thumb came whistling over at a terrifying speed and coincidentally smashed onto Ao Buzan's chest. Fortunately, Ao Buzan's instinct to avoid danger was far faster than his reaction speed. Immediately, 3 layers of black dragon scales emerged on his chest, and he met the meteor head-on. The result was what everyone saw. The half-foot-thick dragon scales on Ao Buzan's chest were smashed to pieces, and the muscles on his chest caved in into a basin-sized pit. Although the meteor was also smashed to pieces, the bizarre black flame in the meteor still lingered on Ao Buzan's chest, burning him and making him emit a strong smell of grilled meat. If she did not know that Ao Buzan's cultivation base was far stronger than hers, perhaps she would have leaped onto Ao Buzan's chest and gnawed on the dragon meat, which was at least 3 to 4 kilograms of cooked dragon meat. Glaring fiercely at Catfish Flood Dragon and the others, who were drooling and staring at him with hostile eyes, Ao Buzan pulled out a short sword and cut off the cooked dragon meat on his chest. Gnashing his teeth in anger, he threw his head back and gave a loud howl into the sky, then opened his mouth and swallowed all the roasted meat. While chewing on his own flesh, Ao Buzan smiled at the unsightly faces of the others and said, "I never thought Lao Tzu's meat could taste so sweet. Io, what the hell is this thing? Why does it hurt Lao Tzu so much?" Wu Qi collected a few fragments of meteorites from Ao Buzan's chest and examined them carefully, then nodded and said with a smile, "So, this is what you are looking for? Do you still remember the incident that stirred up a storm in those years? Do you remember the marriage of Azure Sparrow God to Black Bat Fiend? Her head was suddenly smashed in front of everyone, and half of her body was burned to ashes by a black flame?" What Wu Qi was talking about was a very famous unsolved case among the Chaos Fiend gods. Azure Sparrow God, who was famous for her beauty and singing voice, was married to Black Bat Fiend. As a result, she was killed on the spot by an unknown attack in front of everyone. Black Bat Fiend was a famous overlord among the Chaos Fiend gods. When he saw that the beauty was about to fall into his hands, but was suddenly killed by a dead beauty, he lost his temper and brought his men to hunt down the murderer. As a result, he caused a great bloody storm among the Chaos Fiend gods, and killed at least tens of thousands of them. But judging from what happened today, it was not some evil Chaos Fiend god who killed Azure Sparrow God, but this little meteor that came out of nowhere. Just now, Wu Qi didn't see the trajectory of this little meteor clearly. Its flying speed was at least hundreds of times faster than Wu Qi's fastest flight light. If this thing was made by someone, then that person's cultivation must have reached an unimaginable level. If this thing was born naturally, then what kind of dangerous place could give birth to such a terrible thing? With the defensive power of Ao Buzan's dragon scales, even 3 layers of dragon scales were smashed in one blow. This attack was almost comparable to a full blow from Wu Qi. This time, everyone came to find the ancient sacred palace, but Wu Qi barely retained a little impression of the ancient sacred palace. After all, in his previous life, he had secretly followed the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs to the ancient sacred palace, and he had forgotten the specific way. He would just treat it as a sightseeing tour along the way. Now that such a strange little thing had appeared, Wu Qi was very interested in its origin. Although the risk of sightseeing in the chaos world was a little higher, when Wu Qi called out, everyone followed him excitedly and flew in the direction where this little meteor came from. After flying forward at full speed for 7 days and 7 nights, a strange scene suddenly appeared in front of them. Chapter 1121. A strange, twisted slit appeared in the chaotic airflow. It was a black, spiral-shaped slit, less than 10,000 miles wide, but no one could tell how long it was. It went all the way down from the top of the crowd. The slit was so crooked that it went beyond the limit of Wu Qi's divine sense. When the crowd saw the slit, they instinctively unleashed their divine sense, trying to find out its end. But soon, their expressions changed. Catfish Flooddragon and Lord Xianxing were close to body cultivators, so their divine sense was not very strong. Not only could they not find out the end of the slit, but neither Wu Qi nor Yixia could tell how long it was, which was very frightening. By now, Wu Qi's divine sense could easily cover the whole Panga world, but he could not find out how long this dark slit was. Both Wu Qi and Yixia's faces turned a little blue, and they shook their heads at the same time. In the primal chaos, there were all sorts of strange and bizarre places of natural danger, and this place was obviously one of them. Some broken bricks and tiles were slowly floating in the spiral-shaped black crevice that was slowly rotating. Among them were green bricks the size of a human head and densely covered with exquisite patterns, magnificent stone pillars that were tens of feet in diameter and over 1,000 feet in length, and some exquisite metal components. These metal components were cast into the shapes of beautiful flowers, birds, insects, fishes, and all kinds of humanoid creatures. Each of them glowed with a soft light, and the raging chaotic airflow could not get close to these broken bricks and metal components. Obviously, there used to be a magnificent building here, but someone or some force had destroyed it, leaving behind these broken bricks and tiles. Judging from the look of it, these broken buildings were sinking downward along the track of some force, but a strange force was filling them, which forcibly opened up such a beautiful spiral slit in the chaotic airflow. Countless wreckage slowly rotated and sank down along a fixed trajectory. Above the crowd, countless debris floated in the bottomless black slit, and under their feet, countless debris was also drifting in the bottomless black slit. What is this? Ao Buzin asked subconsciously. He reached out his hand and grabbed a handful of debris in the distance. In the blink of an eye, a 10-feet-tall statue of a naked girl, glowing with a golden light, was pulled over from the void. Naturally, his hands found their way to the towering breasts of the exquisite statue of the naked woman. Then he gave them a couple of obscenities and laughed. Hee, it's still warm. Hee, it's a little soft and springy. While speaking, Ao Buzin's face turned extremely weird. While standing beside him, Wu Qi and the others had goosebumps all over their bodies, staring at the statue in horror. It looked like a statue made of metal, but in fact, it was emitting an extremely faint aura of life. This statue of a naked woman who was in an incomparably beautiful dance pose seemed to have been forcibly transformed into a metal statue by a powerful being with great magic power. However, the divine arts and magic power of the great divinity were incomparably terrifying. The statue of the naked woman actually maintained a certain amount of life force. Although it was made of metal, it had a bit of flesh and blood attribute. Her life didn't end, she was just sealed inside the statue. Subconsciously, he reached out his hand and touched the arm of the statue a few times. As Ao Buzin had said, the statue was warm to the touch, and it had a soft elasticity to it. It was as if he was touching the flesh and blood of a beautiful woman, not a metal statue. However, with his spiritual power, he found that this statue was just a piece of metal. The only difference was that her internal organs, meridians, and blood vessels were no different from those of a living human being. There was even a thick and heavy liquid flowing slowly in her blood vessels like mercury, and there was even a very subtle spiritual fluctuation near her brain. Amazing! What an incredible method! Looking at this statue, Wu Qi shook his head in amazement. Ao Buzin swallowed his saliva. He stared at the statue maliciously and murmured in a low voice, turning a body of flesh and blood into metal? It can be done with some evil spells, but it can still maintain the elasticity of the skin and the life force. But to still maintain the elasticity of the skin and the breath of life, just how powerful is this ability? Shaking his head, Ao Buzin put the statue into his spirit space, then smiled at Wu Qi and asked, Master, Do you think this girl can give birth to a baby? Will the baby we give birth to have a body of flesh and blood, or a body of metal? Tiske, the strength of her body is really scary. Just now, I tried my best to rub her chest, but it didn't leave any mark. If the crystallization of love between her and me can have such a strong body. Hugging a metal statue and groaning with all his might? A few beads of cold sweat broke out on Wu Qi's forehead. Subconsciously, everyone took a few steps back, cautiously staying away from Ao Buzan. Only this perverted dragon could do such a thing, couldn't he? Sowing seeds all over the world, he didn't even let go of a metal statue? Although this was a metal statue with life aura, the plot was too strange. Just imagining it in one's head would send chills down one's spine. Laughing dryly, Wu Qi left Ao Buzan and ignored him. He quickly scanned the surroundings with his divine sense. Fortunately, although there were still a few similar statues around, they were either missing arms or legs and had lost their life force, or they were male statues. Ao Buzan had no interest in men. Shaking his head, Wu Qi pointed up. Immediately, the group of people rose into the air and quickly flew upward, following the debris that was slowly falling down from above. Along the way, Wu Qi kept casting divine powers to help the group speed up. After flying upward for more than a month, a mass of light finally appeared in front of them, and in the light, a huge building that was slowly disintegrating. The building covered a large area, tall and luxurious, and its style was similar to the temples in the Acropolis of Athens that Wu Qi knew. The building measured tens of millions of miles in both length and width, and contained countless palaces and pavilions. Just by looking at the ruins and the exquisite carvings on the stairs and stone pillars, one could tell how luxurious this building must have been in the past. But now, such a huge building was slowly disintegrating like sugar sinking into hot water, disintegrating from all directions. The speed of disintegration was very slow. Wu Qi estimated that in about a year, the surrounding buildings, which were about a foot wide, would disintegrate into pieces. Judging from this, the original scale of this building was even larger, but as time went by, its area had been shrinking. Wu Qi had no idea how long it had existed here, or how large its original area was. However, Wu Qi had a bold guess. Perhaps, this magnificent palace was built by those powerful creatures in the Holy Realm, and after the Holy Realm was destroyed, this building was lost in the chaos. After the Holy Realm was destroyed, countless chaos fiend gods were born in the chaos, and after that, Pan-Gu created the world. After that, countless eons had passed. This building slowly disintegrated in the chaos. If Wu Qi and the others had not accidentally come to this place, perhaps even if someone was lucky enough to come to this place many years later, they would not be able to see this splendid ancient building again. Sighing slightly, Wu Qi felt sorry for those powerful creatures in the Holy Realm, and for the once glorious civilization of the Holy Realm. Wu Qi glanced at this tens of millions of miles in both width and length, which still had many, more or less, well-preserved buildings. Then he carefully activated the heaven refining cauldron and released a stream of light, enveloping the entire building. The light released by the cauldron was still hundreds of thousands of miles away from the building, when a dim light, which was hundreds of times thinner than a fine silk, flashed across the air and disappeared. Not good. Wu Qi only saw a few twisted spell symbols flash within the dim light. Oh no! He shouted out loud, then saw the light suddenly roll back and violently bump into the heaven refining cauldron. If the light released by Wu Qi was a stream, then the light that rolled back had become a vast ocean. The boundless light bumped into the heaven refining cauldron. Wu Qi felt that his internal organs were twitching, as if all the pre-world energies in his body were being squeezed out. 5-colored blood spurted out from his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, while his divine soul suffered a piercing pain. He was nearly sent flying out of his body. Tens of cracks appeared on the cauldron. Looking at those cracks, Wu Qi even wanted to die. In his previous life, it was with this cauldron that old man Yuan Ling built his reputation as the #1 grandmaster in alchemy and artifact crafting. But now, the cauldron was nearly completely destroyed by the backlash from the light. Hastily, Wu Qi retracted the cauldron back into his body. Sensing the mournful cry coming from it, Wu Qi felt like weeping, but no tears came out. To go for wool and come home shorn, only God knew how much time and effort it would take for Wu Qi to fully nourish this cauldron. Princess Zhonglu and Yi Xia cried out in alarm. They rushed to Wu Qi's side in a panic, placing both of their little hands on Wu Qi's back and injecting an enormous amount of energy into Wu Qi's body. Silently exercising the scroll of stealing, Wu Qi helped Princess Zhonglu and Yi Xia to ease the pain in his body. Clenching his jaws tightly, he stared fixedly at the ruins and sneered. He said in a low voice, "I was careless and suffered a great loss. After all, this might be a ruin left behind by the sacred realm. I was too careless, too arrogant. Let's stay here for a little longer. Be careful, and see if we can find some benefits from this place." Seeing that Wu Qi was severely wounded just by trying to collect the ruins, Ao Buzan and the others became extremely cautious. They stared at the huge ruins in front of them with vigilance, as if they had seen some wild beasts. Everyone knew that this ruins was many times more powerful than any wild beasts, but it was also a good place for them to train themselves. If they could not conquer a ruin that had been disintegrated for countless years, how could they go to the ancient sacred palace, which was a well-preserved ruin of the sacred realm? Taking a deep breath, Wu Qi pulled Wu Chang out from the heaven-refining cauldron and threw him towards the ruins. Wu Chang let out a furious roar and flew toward the ruins at top speed. Chapter 11:22. With a shrill howl, Wu Chang was thrown hundreds of thousands of miles away by Wu Qi. After being imprisoned in the heaven-refining cauldron for so many days, Wu Chang had been in a daze. However, he was, after all, an extraordinary man. After being pulled out of the cauldron by Wu Qi, he immediately found himself in the chaos. He knew about the dangers of the chaotic world. After all, he was once the chief oracle of the great alliance of human clans, so he naturally knew a lot of things passed down from ancient times. Wu Qi grabbed him, threw him out, and casually sealed all his cultivation base. No matter what Wu Qi was going to do, he just kept rushing forward like a stone marble. Cold sweat gushed out from every pore of Wu Chang's. Was he thrown out of the chaos like a stone marble? What was in front of him? Was it the nest of those ferocious chaotic creatures? Was it a terrifying natural stronghold that could kill a zenith heaven golden immortal in an instant? Or was it some other terrible place that he could never escape from? An unknown fear made Wu Chang scream at the top of his lungs. His scream was so unpleasant that Wu Qi had to cover his ears with his hands. Didn't this guy claim to have an immortal body? Wu Qi squinted his eyes, covered his ears, and said with a proud smile, "What else could be more suitable as a tool to explore the way? Anyway, he won't die, so there's no risk. At most, he'll suffer a little. Even if he accidentally dies. Well, if he dies, then he dies, right? What's worth?" The people around Wu Qi nodded in agreement. As a man with an immortal body, if you don't sacrifice yourself to explore the way, then who will? They did not have the slightest pity in their hearts. They laughed and watched Wu Chang fly across the void while screaming. Soon, they arrived at the place where the heaven-refining cauldron's fresh air was bounced back. In the void, a very thin and faint halo flashed, and 6 twisted runes flashed slightly. Wu Chang's body suddenly froze, and then he quickly flew towards Wu Qi. If the speed at which Wu Qi threw Wu Chang was 1, then the speed at which Wu Chang was bounced back was 100, or even 1,000 or 10,000. The dreadful speed brought with it a dreadful power. Wu Chang's body was still intact at first, but in just a fraction of a second, when he was less than 100 miles away from Wu Qi, his body could no longer withstand the terrible counterforce. His whole body disintegrated with a boom, turning into minced meat and a mist of blood that sprayed toward Wu Qi and the others. Wu Qi hurriedly raised the sky-covering flag of chaos, and a large cloud of black mist enveloped everyone. The black mist overlapped and formed a tough barrier, blocking Chang's broken flesh and blood. A big half of the black mist that was transformed from the sky-covering flag of chaos was shattered as well, and the flag itself was nearly harmed. What a strong counterforce! The power contained in every drop of Wu Chang's blood and flesh was no weaker than a full-strength strike launched by an ordinary Tao-breaking being. That was enough to destroy a star area in Pangu world. Translators' thoughts Uniman understood. Finally, the crowd realized how frightening the counterforce was that Wu Qi had withstood just now. Fortunately, his fleshly body was ridiculously strong, or else he would have been beaten to the same state as Wu Chang. Fortunately, the sky-shrouding flag of primordial chaos was able to block Wu Chang's blood. The viscous blood wriggled wildly in the void. Gradually, the blood gathered together and reformed into a huge ball of blood. Shrill screams could be heard from the blood ball, and soon, the blood ball began squirming intensely. In a quarter of an hour, Wu Chang reappeared in front of everyone, with a pale face. Countless dirty words were about to come out of Wu Chang's mouth, but Wu Qi grabbed Wu Chang's throat before he could say anything. Wu Qi grinningly said to Wu Chang, "The immortal body is indeed worthy of its reputation. Elder Wu Chang, please try again." Those 6 spell symbols were very mysterious, and I haven't memorized them all yet. As for what those spell symbols can do, you have to try them a few more times. Wu Chang let out a long, shrill cry, but Wu Qi had already thrown him away. This time, Wu Qi had used a little bit of the divine ability of the fiend god of strength from the Inferno Hell Fiend scripture, throwing Wu Chang with a greater force, and at least twice as fast as before. In the blink of an eye, Wu Chang howled miserably as he was bounced back by the light curtain again. This time, Wu Chang's speed was twice as fast, and the force of the rebound was also twice as strong. As soon as Wu Chang was bounced out, his body turned into a pool of blood and flesh that sprayed out in all directions. Wu Qi had produced the sky-veiling flag of chaos and another evil treasure, the soul shield of bone. The 2 supreme treasures of primal protected everyone at the same time, and only then were they able to block the blood and flesh that Wu Chang reflected back. The sky-covering flag of chaos was still intact. After all, it was a primordial treasure that Wu Qi had refined with his blood and life essence. However, the ghost bone shield, which was obtained from Daozu's evil treasure, was slightly damaged. At least 3,000 white bones on the shield, which was made up of tens of thousands of tiny spirit bones, were shattered by Wu Chang's flesh and blood. After all, Wu Qi did not seriously refine these evil treasures, and he only took them out for temporary use. Naturally, their power was not as strong as the sky-covering flag of chaos. Looking at the damaged ghost bone shield, everyone could not help but click their tongues in amazement. The restriction in front of them was indeed mysterious and unpredictable. It could actually reflect flesh and blood with a terrifying power that was enough to destroy a primordial treasure. At the same time, they were also surprised by Wu Chang's strong vitality. This guy actually condensed another blood ball, and in just a quarter of an hour, he once again condensed into a human form. This time, before Wu Qi could strangle his neck, Wu Chang shouted loudly, "Bastard, rascal, how dare you bully me like this?" Ao Buzan strangled Wu Chang's neck with both hands, so that he could not say another word. Ao Buzan gave Wu Qi a simple and honest smile and asked, "It seems like those 6 runes are really mysterious and unfathomable. I've read them twice just now, but I've only remembered the appearance of 2 of them. It seems that I have to throw this guy out a few more times? This time, let's see what I can do." Wu Qi nodded with a smile on his face, then produced 2 more evil supreme treasures and prepared them. Grabbing Wu Chang's neck, Ao Buzan spun him dozens of times as if he was throwing a hammer. When Wu Chang's neck was about 3 feet long, Ao Buzan let out a loud laugh and threw Wu Chang out. Wu Chang let out another sharp and long roar, and his body was once again thrown towards the restriction tens of thousands of miles away. Light flashed, and the 6 spell symbols flashed again. This time, Wu Qi and the others all concentrated on memorizing the appearance of the 6 spell symbols, and the flow of the light inside them. Wu Chang howled miserably. This time, as soon as he touched the barrier, he was turned into a puddle of blood. Then, accompanied by a loud boom, a great amount of blood shot whistling toward the crowd. Every drop of blood, which was the result of Wu Chang's broken fleshly body, tore through the void and came in front of Wu Qi and the others like thunderbolts. This time, the two defensive ultimate treasures, the ghost-skinned green spirit flag and the myriad poison mystic light shield, were shattered by the reflected blood. Even the black mist spurted out by the sky-covering flag of chaos was shattered by 70%, and the sky-covering flag of chaos was almost hurt. However, the group of people also found that the more strength they used to throw Wu Chang, the longer the restriction would appear, and the longer the 6 spell symbols would appear. Therefore, the group of people could remember the shapes of the 6 spell symbols and the flow of the energy inside them more clearly. When Wu Chang's body reformed, Wu Qi and the others discussed for a while. Then, the group of people laughed and stood in a strange formation of the 8 trigrams. This time, no one threw Wu Chang. Instead, everyone's magic power was gathered in the formation. Everyone's magic power was transformed by the formation and turned into a huge force that wrapped Wu Chang up and shot him out. This time, the power that Wu Chang carried was at least 100 times greater than when Wu Qi and Ao Buzan threw him out alone, and the speed was much faster. The thin restriction flickered violently, and the restriction lasted in the void for a breath's time before slowly dissipating. This time, Wu Chang was not reflected back, because his body was exploding and shattering crazily in the restrictive formation. In just a blink of an eye, he had turned into a plume of thick, blood-red smoke. Even the plume of smoke was quickly cut into pieces amidst the blinking light of the restrictive formation. All the power of the restrictive formation was used to deal with Wu Chang, and not a single bit of it leaked out to attack Wu Qi and the others. After a breath's time, a wisp of bloody smoke gathered in the void, and then slowly turned into a sticky ball of blood. Soon, Wu Chang, who had an ugly expression on his face, was formed again. This time, Wu Qi could not help but clap his hands and exclaim, "It's indeed an immortal body. It's really powerful. Oh, Wu Chang, you're really the best cannon fodder in the world." Wu Chang knelt weakly in the void. He trembled as he looked at Wu Qi and the others. Suddenly he screamed at the top of his lungs, "Kill me, please kill me. What kind of damned restriction is this?" Wu Chang's face twitched and his eyes turned white. Sticky white foam kept coming out of his mouth, and he looked like he was going insane. Wu Qi could not help but be curious. Did the restriction really make Wu Chang suffer so much? Why did he look like he had been tortured in the 18 levels of hell for countless years, and his whole body was about to collapse? That was strange. He had been imprisoned by the Celestial Court for so many years, but hadn't he always been full of energy? Shaking his head, Wu Qi produced the sky-veiling flag of chaos and pulled Wu Chang back. "If we could kill you, we'd definitely give you a quick death," he said with a smile. "But look, we can't kill you now either. You have an immortal body." Ao Buzan gently patted Wu Chang's cheek and said with a smile, all right, what's the point of crying when you're a man? Now that things have come to this, just accept your fate. Aren't we just asking you to test the enemy's restriction? You make it look like your mother died. Do you have to be so miserable?" Laughing strangely, Ao Buzan grabbed Wu Chang and asked, "Who is interested in throwing him again?" Lord Xianxing took Wu Chang from him with a smile on his face, then turned to Wu Qi and said, "An immortal body is a supreme treasure. With such a stone to explore the way, what formation can stop us? This is a treasure." The crowd burst into laughter, and Wu Chang was thrown out again. Chapter 11:23. Kill me. A long and shrill cry shook the heavens and the earth, but no one paid attention to it. Wu Chang, who was on the verge of death, lay weakly on a piece of white cloud. His eyes were unfocused as he stared at an unknown spot in the distance. Some parts of his body were charred as if he had been struck by lightning. Some parts of his body were covered with a thin layer of ice as if he had been frozen by ice and snow. Some parts of his body were bloody as if he had been bitten by wild beasts. Some parts of his body were fragmented and sticky as if someone had pounded them and glued them back together. Although he had an immortal body, every time he recovered his body, he would consume a portion of his essence qi. If his essence qi was used up, Wu Chang would have to wash his hands and absorb the spiritual qi from the outside world to replenish his body. However, at this moment, Wu Chang was in the midst of chaos. There was violent chaotic spiritual qi all around him. Among everyone present, only Wu Qi, Ao Buzan, Princess Zhonglu, and Yi Xia could absorb and use this chaotic spiritual qi. For the others, absorbing the chaotic spiritual qi was like taking a huge poison. They were courting death. Not only could Wu Chang not absorb the chaotic spiritual qi to recover his essence qi, but he also had to continuously consume his essence qi to isolate the chaotic spiritual qi from his body. He was already severely exhausted, and now he was continuously consuming his essence qi. He could only feel his vision turning black, and it seemed like he could not hold on any longer. However, Wu Qi was not in the mood to help Wu Chang heal. To Wu Qi, a half-dead Wu Chang was more reliable than an energetic Wu Chang. Along the way, he had relied on Wu Chang to explore the way, but Wu Chang had also tried to escape several times. Once, he had even escaped millions of miles away with a part of his essence qi. Fortunately, Wu Qi was vigilant and captured him alive. Since then, Wu Qi had been more careful in using Wu Chang. He had been even more careful in letting Wu Chang traverse the mines all the way here. Seeing that there was only one last and most complicated restriction left, Wu Qi was racking his brains to break it. The ruins that were slowly collapsing had a total of 13 restrictive spells. The outermost restrictive spell was the one that had caused Wu Qi so much pain. It was a restrictive spell composed of 6 runes. Through Wu Chang's conscientious exploration, the mystery of the 6 runes was fully grasped by Wu Qi. Then, Wu Qi used the primordial runes in the Book of Ancient God to build a complicated forbidden-breaking formation, completely breaking the forbidden-breaking formation that had almost exhausted its energy. After that, 11 more restrictions appeared one after another. Each rune was more complicated than the previous one, and also more powerful. However, with the experience of breaking the first restriction, and with the help of Wu Chang, the best pathfinder in the world, Wu Qi spent a lot of time and energy to finally break all 11 restrictions. Now, it was the last restriction. There were a total of 360 different runes in the first 12 restrictions. Each rune had a magical effect that could seize the heaven and earth. These runes were more profound and powerful than those in the Book of Ancient God. For example, one of the runes that controlled the power of thunder. When Wu Qi had fully grasped it, he could casually strike out a thunderbolt, which was more powerful than the hundreds of primordial runes that were related to thunder and lightning in the Book of Ancient God. The last restriction in front of him was a combination of 360 different runes. It contained all the natural forces of earth, water, fire, wind, thunder, water, and electricity. All the natural forces merged into one, turning into a thick and sticky light fog that shrouded the surroundings. If someone accidentally stepped into it, he or she would be lost in the light fog, or crushed to death by the light fog. It was indeed an extremely powerful restriction. However, Wu Qi had already understood the mystery of the 360 runes in the first 12 restrictions. When these runes were combined together, it was just a little bit more variation. After using Wu Chang to explore the way several dozens of times and carefully exploring all the runes, Wu Qi finally unraveled the last layer of restrictive spell. A bright light shone in front of them, and the disintegrating ruin immediately appeared before their eyes. As soon as the restriction was broken, they were looking at the huge ruin at a close distance. Suddenly, they heard a loud whistling sound, and a fierce strong light shot up along the spiral-shaped black crack. Along the way, countless debris was knocked away by the strong light. Before Wu Qi and the others could react, the strong light had already hit the bottom of the ruin. With a muffled sound, the ruin trembled violently. Some stones of different sizes at the bottom of the ruin were shattered by the bright light. Countless stones were suddenly accelerated to an unimaginable speed, flying in all directions with a faint black flame. Wu Qi and the others happened to be floating above the ruin. Therefore, those stones only shot in all directions, but none of them shot at Wu Qi and the others. Is this the origin of the stones? Wu Qi finally understood the origin of the mysterious stones that killed the Blue Sparrow deity and wounded Ao Buzan a few days ago. The light that shot up along the spiral-shaped track was very strange. Presumably, there were other secrets hidden under the black crack. But now, the huge ruin was right in front of them, and they could figure out the origin of the light later. The most important thing now was to explore the ruin. He grabbed Wu Chang, who was at his last gasp, and threw him forcefully into the ruin. Along with a muffled sound, Wu Chang bumped into a stone pillar at the edge of the ruin, which was about 30 meters thick and thousands of meters tall. The stone pillar was green and looked like a translucent glass, with countless patterns of flowers and plants carved on it. Wu Chang bumped into a long line of patterns of grass. The patterns of grass were small and delicate, with a large number of bumps sticking out of the stone pillar. When Wu Chang bumped into the patterns of grass, his body was hooked by a protruding blade of grass. Wu Chang suddenly let out a strange breathing sound. He breathed deeply, and around his body, a strong, visible spiritual power appeared. As he inhaled, a huge whirlpool appeared, and a large amount of spiritual power surged into his body. In the blink of an eye, Wu Chang, whose face was pale and covered in wounds, suddenly had a healthy glow on his face. His wounds healed quickly, and even his dry skin turned red. When Wu Chang's injuries healed and his energy recovered, the spirit qi around his body suddenly disappeared. It was as if the spirit qi had been an illusion. The group of people was stunned for a long time, staring at Wu Chang from tens of miles away. Wu Chang, who was also confused, stared at Wu Qi. After a long time, he murmured to himself, "Don't ask me why. Those spiritual qi, I was thinking that I needed a lot of it, and it just appeared out of nowhere. When I recovered, I didn't need it anymore, and it disappeared." Ao Buzan was stunned for a while, then he murmured to himself, "Is there really such a good thing?" Shaking his head, Ao Buzan turned into a beam of light and landed on the top of the huge stone pillar. He closed his eyes and murmured, "I don't need any spiritual qi for now. Beautiful women with long legs and big breasts, beautiful women with long legs and big breasts, I don't need any clothes. Beautiful virgins with long legs and big breasts, come out now, come out now." Wu Qi's eyeballs almost popped out of his eye sockets. He stared at Ao Buzan in shock. Right next to Ao Buzan, beautiful women with long legs and big breasts kept popping out one after another. All the women were of different shapes and sizes, and their faces were not the same. However, all of them were so beautiful that they could topple cities and countries. All of them were exuding a strong sense of lust, staring at Ao Buzan like a female cat that had taken too many drugs that it should not have on a spring night. Ao Buzan, who was murmuring to himself, slowly opened his eyes. He was stunned for a while, then he grabbed the big breasts of a beautiful woman with red hair. He carefully rubbed the breasts, then threw his head back and roared, "Merciful Buddha, this is a paradise for men, a paradise for us real men." Ao Buzan threw his head back and laughed, his saliva spraying out of his mouth. Goldhorn and Silverhorn's eyes lit up at the same time. They swooped down and sat cross-legged on a large pillar next to Ao Buzan, then murmured, "Meat, so much meat from dragons. So many living dragons lying on the ground for us to eat." In just a blink of an eye, 2 divine dragons, 10 miles long and plump, appeared next to the brothers. 2 giant dragons with beautiful and dazzling pale golden scales and exuberant blood essence lay sprawled on the ground. Their huge dragon eyes were fixed on Goldhorn and Silverhorn while they bared their most vulnerable abdomen as if they were ready to be tasted by Goldhorn and Silverhorn. "Haha, I like this place." Seeing that the things that Goldhorn and Silverhorn dreamed of were right next to them, Catfish Flood Dragons sprang impatiently to the front door of a dilapidated hall. "Meat, delicious meat. I don't care what race they are, as long as they are made of meat. I'm not picky. Ha ha ha." Catfish Flood Dragon's strong appetite had stimulated her spirit. Her eyes had turned into a frightening green color, while pieces of fresh, bloody demon beast meat kept popping up around her. Catfish Flood Dragon breathed a sigh of satisfaction, grabbed a piece of meat from an unknown demon beast that weighed more than 500 kilograms, and stuffed it into her mouth with an indescribable feeling of being touched. Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu were struck dumb. What the hell was this ruin? Why did they feel a frightening divine force in this place that could make anything come true? The beautiful girl standing next to Ao Buzan, the two great dragons standing next to Goldhorn and Silverhorn, and the meat next to Catfish Flood Dragon, no matter how hard Wu Qi examined them with his divine will, they were all living beings, real entities, and not phantoms. Two beams of light flashed as Gold Feather and Silver Feather rushed to the side of Goldhorn and Silverhorn. The sisters narrowed their eyes and murmured quietly for a while. Then, two heavenly dragons with light silver bodies appeared beside them. The sisters transformed back to their true forms, opened their mouths, and bit off the necks of the two sky dragons, then began to devour their blood and flesh. On the top of another stone pillar, Ao Buzan was impatiently casting all kinds of restrictive spells around him. He could not wait to put his arms around these beautiful girls, who perfectly met his aesthetic standards, and have sex with them for 30,000 rounds. Wu Qi swallowed a mouthful of saliva. After a brief moment of pondering, he carefully landed in the ruins. Narrowing his eyes, Wu Qi tried to recall something in his memory, then reached out his hand and murmured in a low voice, "Myriad Spirit Cauldron, the original spirit treasure of Pangu world, Myriad Spirit Cauldron, come out, come out." As Wu Qi murmured, a large square cauldron slowly emerged in front of him. But when the cauldron was about to take shape, a loud pop rang out, and the cauldron disappeared abruptly. All the others had their dreams fulfilled, but the Myriad Spirit Cauldron in Wu Qi's dream did not. Chapter 11:24. Everything on the huge stone pillar was shrouded in a dense mist. Apart from Ao Buzan's heavy panting, no one could see what was going on inside. Only the occasional cries of a cat, which sounded like the cries of a cat, could make people guess what was going on inside. Goldhorn, Silverhorn, Goldfeather, and Silverfeather were gorging themselves. Dozens of dragon bones were piled up haphazardly next to them, and large chunks of dragon meat were being swallowed by them. It was obvious that their bodies were undergoing some mysterious changes. With the replenishment of a large amount of true dragon meat, their bodies were becoming stronger and more psychic. Goldhorn's and Goldfeather's bodies had turned into half-energy gold, and so did Silverhorn and Silverfeather. Their bodies had turned translucent, as if they were formed from light mist. Clearly, their bodies were undergoing a rapid reaction with the energy of heaven and earth, and their divine abilities and magic power were undergoing a rapid transformation. The same was true for Catfish and Lord Xianxing. They kept forming a huge number of divine beasts around them, plucking out their essence and devouring it. Their physical strength and magic power were growing rapidly, and their bones were crackling like popping beans. It was obvious that their physical strength was growing crazily. Princess Zhonglu was hovering in a 5-colored cloud, constantly absorbing a large amount of innate energies of 5 elements, purifying and transforming them into her own chaotic divine energy. Xia, on the other hand, was laughing wildly as she devoured the pure souls that kept emerging from around her. Each of them was at least as strong as the immortal soul of a peak-level gold immortal, and with every soul Xia devoured, her aura grew stronger. Everyone had obtained endless benefits here. As long as they could think of something, it would immediately appear. Only Wu Qi's Myriad Spirit Cauldron failed. Just when the cauldron in Wu Qi's mind was about to take shape, Wu Qi's divine soul suddenly went into a trance, and the huge cauldron disintegrated with a boom, turning into billowing natural energy and scattering in all directions. Wu Qi was blasted away by the Myriad Spirit Cauldron, and he almost vomited blood. Strange, everyone has gotten what they want, including the incomparably precious innate energies of 5 elements. So, why did the Myriad Spirit Cauldron fail? Wu Qi pondered for a brief moment, then frowned and gave it another thought. Accompanied by a low rumble, a huge 3-legged cauldron slowly appeared in front of Wu Qi. The cauldron's entire body was shimmering with a clear light, exuding a strong innate aura. White true fire kept gushing out of it, as if it could refine the entire world. The heaven refining cauldron, the life treasure of Elder Yuan Ling in Wu Qi's previous life, actually appeared in front of Wu Qi out of thin air. After a long while, Wu Qi took out his heaven refining cauldron, which had cracked because of the counterforce of the restrictive spells. Except for the dozens of glaring cracks on its surface, this heaven refining cauldron looked no different from the original one. Carefully, Wu Qi sent his divine sense into the heaven refining cauldron in front of him. It was indeed the heaven refining cauldron. Be it the aura or the quality, or even the countless restrictive spells left in it by Elder Yuan Ling, everything was the same. After pondering for a brief moment, Wu Qi slowly pushed the heaven refining cauldron over his head towards the cauldron in front of him. Softly he recited the controlling spell of the heaven refining cauldron, while his hands kept changing incantation gestures. At the same time, the two cauldrons sprayed out the milky white Yuan Ling true fire. The white flames blended with each other and gradually merged into one. The flames dragged each other and produced a strong suction force. Slowly, the two cauldrons merged into one. Soon, a brand new heaven refining cauldron appeared in front of Wu Qi. All the cracks on the cauldron were gone, and everything went back to normal. However, this new heaven refining cauldron was at least twice as powerful as Wu Qi's original spirit treasure. In terms of materials and other aspects, everything was much stronger than before. Even the temperature of the Yuan Ling true fire inside the cauldron had been raised by at least 2 times. Curiously, Wu Qi waved a finger towards the white flame. Along with a sizzling noise, the skin and flesh on his finger were instantly burned off. The heaven refining true fire, which was made from his primordial spirit, actually burned his physical body. Wu Qi's heart missed a beat, then he was wild with joy. Apparently, this was because the power of the Yuan Ling true fire had skyrocketed, and he still couldn't control it freely. Even his strong physical body couldn't withstand this flame. If it were anyone else, they would have been burned into ashes within a moment, wouldn't they? Remaining silent for a while, Wu Qi decided to go all out. One heaven refining cauldron after another appeared in front of him, and he kept merging them with each other. After 36 times, an enormous heaven refining cauldron, tens of thousands of meters tall, could no longer shrink, no matter how hard Wu Qi incanted a spell or cast a spell. The white flame released from the cauldron instantly raised the surrounding temperature, scaring everyone except Wu Qi and forcing them to flee in panic, appeared in front of Wu Qi. The power of this cauldron had reached an unimaginable level. Wu Qi could barely control it by activating all of his soul power, just like a 3- or 5-year-old kid trying to control a fierce horse. Wu Qi's entire body was soaked in cold sweat, and he felt powerless. He clenched his teeth tightly and continued to inject one controlling spirit art after another into this ridiculously powerful heaven refining cauldron, barely preventing it from suffering any irreparable damage. The heaven refining cauldron was a supreme grand mist artifact. Now, when more than 30 heaven refining cauldrons merged into one, its power didn't just increase by more than 30 times, but by nearly 100 times. This had exceeded the limit of Wu Qi's ability to control it freely. The flame that was crazily shooting out from the cauldron's mouth made Wu Qi feel a sense of fear. The feeling was like a father looking at his son, who had gone insane and became a man with extraordinary strength. Although Wu Qi could still sense that the Yuan Ling true flame was the prime true flame refined from his divine soul, he could barely control it, and could not control it as freely as before. Gnashing his teeth, Wu Qi threw a supreme grand mist artifact, the soul-slaughtering green light, which he obtained from Daozu, into the heaven refining cauldron. Along with a loud sizzling noise, this evil supreme grand mist artifact was burned into a wisp of green smoke by Yuan Ling's true flame, without leaving any residue. After being tossed around by Wu Qi, the heaven refining cauldron had completely surpassed the grade of the so-called supreme grand mist artifact, reaching a level that even Wu Qi could not understand. Perhaps, the heaven refining cauldron now looked like some of the treasures in the holy world? Perhaps, those real saints in the holy world used powerful treasures like the heaven refining cauldron? With a twisted face, Wu Qi kept incanting incantations and spitting out 36 mouthfuls of blood essence in a row. Only then did he retract the heaven-refining cauldron into his body. Panting, he wrapped the heaven-refining cauldron with his divine soul and barely suppressed it. Then, he tried to nourish it with his divine soul and communicate with it, hoping to regain the feeling of being able to control it as easily as he did in the past. All the people crowded around him, asking him what happened just now in astonishment. Just now, the heaven-refining cauldron suddenly exploded, sending a white flame soaring into the sky. The surrounding temperature rose crazily, and even the supreme grand mist artifact was instantly turned into a wisp of green smoke. The terrible heat made everyone flee in panic. Apart from the others, Aobuzan was the only one who was in a sorry state. He flew into the sky with his bare buttocks, looking 10,000 times worse than anyone else. Therefore Aobuzan was the angriest of them all. He bared his fangs and brandished his claws, asking Wu Qi what he had done. Thoughtfully, Wu Qi told everyone what he had just done. The myriad spirit cauldron did not succeed, but the heaven-refining cauldron, which Wu Qi knew every detail about, was successfully formed. Wu Qi had a speculation. It was true that people could form all kinds of objects according to their will, but they could only do so when they were the objects they were most familiar with. For example, Aobuzan was very familiar with women. Gold Horn, Silver Horn, and Gold Feather were very familiar with the body structure of dragons. Catfish and Lord Xianxing, the two foodies, were very familiar with the body structure of all kinds of divine beasts. Yuan Qing and Tu Xiaobai were very familiar with the aroma and taste of various spirit fruits. As for Princess Xiangli, she had completely mastered the innate 5 elements energy. As for Yi Xia, as the ancestor of the invisible heavenly fiends, she could clearly analyze any soul. They were very familiar with the objects they wanted to form, so they were able to form the objects they wanted in the ruins. But Wu Qi had failed to form the myriad spirit cauldron, because apart from its appearance, Wu Qi knew nothing about it. The heaven-refining cauldron had been refined by Lord Yuanling for countless years, so he was familiar with every detail of it. Therefore, he was able to successfully condense the heaven-refining cauldron. Not only that, he had condensed dozens of heaven-refining cauldrons in a row, but he had also fused them into one, turning them into a supreme grand mist artifact whose power far surpassed that of a grand mist artifact. As Wu Qi explained, he reached out his hand again. The myriad spirit cauldron gradually appeared in front of him. But after a while, just as the myriad spirit cauldron was about to take shape, the cauldron suddenly shattered with a bang. The spiritual energy that gushed out from the cauldron blasted everyone away. After that, Wu Qi recited a spell in his mind, and a sky-veiling flag of chaos slowly took shape in front of him. Then, he produced the one he had refined himself. The two flags were exactly the same. He used a mystic art to fuse the two flags into one, and the power of the sky-veiling flag of chaos instantly doubled. My guess is right. The things that can make one's wishes come true must be the things that one knows best. Wu Qi recalled some information he had learned from Pangu. Those mighty saints in the real sacred realm had this ability. They could create all kinds of treasures and races out of thin air, and they could create all kinds of things with just a thought. That was how interesting this ruin was. This was merely a ruin, yet it already possessed such a frightening power. It was hard to imagine what the real sacred realm was like before the world destruction. Looking at the crumbling ruins around him, Wu Qi breathed out a long sigh and said, "With our current knowledge and experience, we still don't know how this divine ability works. But, don't bring those women out again. Make good use of this place and improve your overall strength." In Yuanling's nether realm, there is a rainbow divine lotus that I've always been reluctant to consume. A single lotus can improve the cultivation of each of us by 10 eons. The eyes of the people standing around Wu Qi shone instantly. Even Princess Xiangli stared at Wu Qi with their eyes wide open. A single lotus could improve the cultivation of each of them by 10 eons. Then, if they could produce 800 or 1,000 lotuses in this place, wouldn't the biggest weakness of Wu Qi and his companions be eliminated? Their cultivation was not weak at all, and the only thing they lacked was energy. Wu Qi smiled. It was such a shame that no one had come to this ruin for so many years. Chapter 11:25. The relic quaked intensely, and the violent sphere of energy surging up through the spiral-shaped cracks struck the relic once again. Everyone was already used to this. Every 3 to 5 months, or as short as 7 to 8 days, this ball of energy of unknown origin would attack the ruins. Every strike would cause some damage to the relic, but compared to the relic, which was over 10 million miles squared, the damage was negligible. It was just that the pebbles released by the mass of energy might cause some unlucky souls to bleed or die. Apart from that, there was no other harm to this mass of energy. Sitting on the roof of a great hall near the core area of the relic, Wu Qi burped with difficulty, staring at the 3-feet-tall pile of 7-colored divine lotuses in front of him. The colorful petals and stems were translucent, as if streams of light had been flowing in them. A faint aroma spread out from them, and the strong energy vibration could be clearly sensed even from hundreds of thousands of miles away. This kind of lotus was the only one in Yuan Ling's nether realm. But because they came to this relic, with the knowledge of Yuan Ling, Wu Qi generated over 10,000 of these lotuses and distributed them to the others. Yuan Ling's nether realm had also grown over 10,000 of them, and Wu Qi had even opened up a lotus field in Yuan Ling's nether realm. 3 years had gone by unknowingly. He had devoured thousands of rainbow divine lotus flowers, and his magic power and cultivation base had been greatly improved. He might not be as powerful as the group of Dao-fusing cultivators in Pangu world, but no Dao-breaking cultivator could be as powerful as Wu Qi. The 7-colored divine lotus was fragrant, beautiful, and contained an extremely great power. As long as one swallowed it, the great power contained in it could be gently transformed into the power of 10 Dao tribulations. Nevertheless, this lotus had many benefits, but its taste could make people collapse. It was sour, spicy, bitter, and all kinds of horrible tastes that could make people suffer were contained in it. However, in order to take effect faster and better, Wu Qi had to chew it carefully and swallow it. Every time Wu Qi swallowed such a deadly treasure, the terrible taste that rippled directly from his divine soul almost drove him crazy. This smell that almost drove him crazy lasted for thousands of times. Wu Qi even thought that he had gone mad. Otherwise, how could he endure it for so long? However, sensing the immeasurably great power contained in his body, Wu Qi gnashed his teeth and grabbed another lotus. While burping with a stinky smell, he knitted his eyebrows and thrust the lotus into his mouth, then began chewing loudly. The strong medicinal liquid tumbled into his stomach, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a rolling hot current that spread throughout his body. It was as if a bomb had exploded inside his body. The boundless ocean of magic power inside his body rippled like huge waves. The purple-golden magic power swept across his entire body and was absorbed by the innate chaotic divine soul in his spiritual sea. Then, it was purified and turned into primordial purple airflow. Because of the constant growth of his magic power, his divine soul had also skyrocketed thousands of times over the past 3 years. He could now freely control the newborn heaven refining cauldron, the newborn sky veiling flag of chaos, and dozens of other supreme artifacts of primal he had carefully selected. The power of all the supreme treasures had been enhanced by the unique refining method, and each of them had been enhanced to a realm completely different from that of ordinary supreme treasures of primal. At least, with the strength of Wu Qi's fleshly body now, any of them could easily smash him to pieces. This horrified Wu Qi. Apart from Pangu and Empress Hua, the strength of his fleshly body was now the strongest in Pangu world. Even if a supreme artifact of primal hit him, it would not cause him any serious injury. However, in this relic, these treasures had been continuously merging with each other, and now, they could actually pose such a direct threat to Wu Qi. Back then, how powerful were the people from the Holy World? Compared to them, how weak was the current Pangu world? All these had cast a dark cloud over Wu Qi's heart. He could only try his best to improve himself, and strive for a slim chance of survival in the endless danger. The more he touched these things that might be related to the Holy World, the weaker Wu Qi felt he was, and the more danger lurked in every corner. Without enough power, how could he protect himself and the people around him? Slowly chewing and swallowing another lotus, Ji-Hao's body had already become numb because of the strange smell, and his soul was a bit stiff as well. However, during the past 3 years, apart from swallowing the 7-colored divine lotus to improve his power and cultivation, Wu Qi had been studying the 360 spell symbols. Since the ruin was so marvelous, it was obvious that the restrictive spell that could protect it from the periphery was no trivial matter. He had personally experienced the power of these 360 runes. Each of them contained endless secrets and could unleash an incredible force. Different from the ancient divine characters recorded in the ancient divine book, those were the characters used by divine gods who were born after Pan-Gu created the world. Every single character pointed directly to the origin of the world, to the core of the great Tao. However, both the origin and the core represented the origin of Pan-Gu world, the core of Pan-Gu world. These 360 runes were magnificent, and they exuded an ancient aura. They carried an inviolable divine might. Compared to them, the divine characters recorded in the ancient god book were like stars vainly trying to compete with the sun. They were not on the same level at all. Wu Qi had already forgotten all divine characters recorded in the divine book. Instead, he focused all his attention on these 360 spell symbols. Although he had personally cracked the restriction laid down by these runes, he had only used the runes themselves to crack the restriction laid down by the runes. It was as if there was a door there, and he had used the key left on the door to open it. However, he knew nothing about how to make the door, or how to forge the key. By now, Wu Qi only had a basic knowledge about how to make the door. He had been analyzing the method of making the door and the key, and studying all kinds of magical principles. During the past 3 years, due to the improvement of his power, his soul had been thousands of times stronger than before. Therefore, his analyzing ability had improved tremendously as well. Before, these 360 spell symbols were quite difficult to understand, but now, they were crystal clear in his eyes, containing endless mysteries. For example, from the simple spell symbol that represented light, Wu Qi sensed the boundless light and heat. The limit of light was white, and nothingness, which could destroy everything. That scorching hot and violent power even made Wu Qi feel endless terror. The power contained in these spell symbols was terrifying. Every single spell symbol had its own world, its own natural law. Once the divine characters in the divine book were activated, they merely borrowed the power of the great Tao of nature. However, every single one of these spell symbols represented the power of the great Tao itself. Every single one of these spell symbols represented a unique natural law. For example, the light spell symbol. When it appeared, all the power in the surroundings would be repelled by it, incinerated and melted by it. Especially the power of darkness and evil that opposed the light, it would use the most tyrannical method to completely destroy them. He had the cultivation techniques of many almighty experts of the Buddhist League, and the light of the Buddhist League was also a supreme divine ability that could purge darkness and evil. But compared to the light that erupted from this light rune, the power of this rune was purer, more domineering, and more repellent. Even when the Buddhist light touched the light and heat released by the light rune symbol, it could only be devoured or destroyed. This was a power of a higher level than the Buddhist light. If the Buddhist light was a surging river that possessed endless power, then the rune symbol represented the source of the river, the boundless ocean. The river would either merge with it or be repelled by the ocean, causing it to vanish. Wu Qi could sense that after several dozen upgrades, his heaven-refining cauldron and the chaotic sky-concealing flag had been imprinted with energy of a higher level and more original level similar to the rune symbol, which was why these newly born treasures possessed such terrifying power. He had a bold guess. This ruin should have been the residence of a great expert in the saint's world, and the rune symbol was comprehended by that great expert. It was a concrete manifestation of the peak power of the saint's world. Before the saint's world had been destroyed, the people who lived in the ruins could drink all sorts of drinks when they were thirsty, and delicacies could be found everywhere when they were hungry. If they wanted to indulge in extravagant pleasures, women and men could appear at any time they wanted. Everything they wanted could come true. It would not be an exaggeration to call this place a paradise of dreams. If the 360 runes were left behind by the saint's world, it was only natural for them to possess such overbearing and original power. Wu Qi thought about the mysterious palace where Thousand Head and the other 13 world breakers had stored the immortal soul seal. The runes outside the palace were so deep that Wu Qi could not understand them. Wu Qi had only memorized the patterns of the runes, and his soul had almost been shattered. That showed the runes outside the palace were even higher level. Perhaps they represented the highest level of power in the saint's world. Pangu already has that power. Wu Qi thought about what Pangu had shown him. Pangu could easily draw the runes. Although Hansen had 360 runes, these runes were a lot worse than the ones he had seen. Days went by, and when Wu Qi had been staying in the ruin for the 7th year, a tremendous change suddenly took place in his body. He had completely comprehended all 360 runes, and the power of his divine soul had skyrocketed 100 times in an instant. Strong energy gushed out of the ruins and poured directly into his body, turning into a power that was even more mysterious and unpredictable than the primal purple energy. It was not just the spirit power that entered his body that changed. Even the Hongmeng purple air in Wu Qi's body, which was as vast as the sea, was changing. The new power was not fixed. It was like a fine diamond dust. It carried a lot of light that flowed through his body. At that very moment, Wu Qi had transformed into a huge light bulb, emitting a bright light that illuminated the surroundings. The entire ruin was illuminated by the light he emitted. Wu Qi felt like he had been stuck at the Tao breaking level for a long time. He suddenly had a breakthrough, but his god's soul did not merge with the sky path of some world. He seemed to have entered a state that was similar to the Tao fusing level, but it was different. He had reached the peak of the Tao breaking level, but his understanding of this level was not like the Tao fusing level. Chapter 11:26. Different, a completely different feeling. Whether it was his transcendence energy, his body, or his divine soul, everything was different. Wu Qi clenched his fists tightly. His body was as soft as cotton, yet as hard as iron. The degree of toughness was beyond his understanding. He took out a primordial supreme treasure, the white bone arrow, which he had obtained from Daozu. Then he casually struck it with his palm. Although he felt a sharp pain in his palm, a few hair-thin cracks appeared on the white bone arrow. With a body that was strong enough to contend with a primordial supreme treasure, Wu Qi took a deep breath. Suddenly, a bright light shot out from his eyes. Wherever the bright light passed through, the ground of the ruin would suddenly grow into a large patch of flowers and plants. Lush flowers and trees grew vigorously, and the solid ground had turned into fertile and soft soil. A rich floral fragrance wafted in the air. Some bees and butterflies appeared out of nowhere, circling around the flowers. Vaguely, the clear light bursting out of his eyes seemed to possess a divine ability that could make one's wish come true. Although it could not materialize anything too powerful, ordinary flowers, grass, trees, insects, fishes, birds, and beasts were not a problem. His divine sense spread out from between his eyebrows like a ripple, and in the blink of an eye, it covered the entire ruin. It was very different. It was a completely different feeling compared to the previous divine sense exploration. In the past, when he used to scan with his divine sense, it was like a ripple skimming across the surface of an object. If he wanted to investigate the internal situation of an object, he would have to use his divine sense to penetrate into the object. But now, once he released his divine sense, it was like his divine sense was a part of an external object. Without any sluggishness, it blended into everything it passed by. Every flower, every grass, every tree, every stone, every detail of their structure, everything was reflected in Wu Qi's divine soul. Even the white bone arrow in Wu Qi's hand, its material, its structure, and the various arrays and restrictions in its core, everything was reflected in Wu Qi's eyes. Wonderful! With a light touch of his finger, the white bone arrow shriveled instantly. The energy essence of this evil supreme treasure was sucked clean by Wu Qi. Especially when Yuan Ling, who was about to take shape in its core, was easily grabbed out by Wu Qi and devoured by him. The tremendous energy merged with Wu Qi's mutated divine soul, making it expand once again. This feeling was like the vault door of a bank was wide open in front of a thief, and he could easily plunder the wealth in it without any effort. Wu Qi suddenly realized that after reaching this realm, the power of many of the techniques in Scroll of Stealing had increased by countless times, and he could even plunder the energy and souls of supreme primal treasures for his own use. Not only the transformation of his fleshly body and divine soul, but the transformation of his magic power shocked him even more. All the almighty experts in Pangu world believed that the primordial purple energy was the highest grade of energy in the world, the supreme existence in the chaos. But the primordial purple energy Wu Qi had cultivated had now transformed into a purer, stronger, and more magical power. In front of this strange power, which was sparkling and translucent like diamonds and stardust, the primordial purple energy was as fragile as tofu under a steel knife. After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi exercised a mystic art in Scroll of Stealing. With the primordial purple energy in his left hand, he condensed a Kunwu sword with the primordial purple energy in his left hand, and an identical one with the new power in his right hand. He gripped the hilts of the two swords and gently swung them against each other. Along with a clear cracking noise, the Kunwu sword in his left hand, which was transformed from the primal purple qi, was easily cut into two, while the Kunwu sword in his right hand was not even scratched. After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi closed his eyes and devoted himself to the transformation of this new energy. His divine soul, which had grown thousands of times stronger, was rapidly devouring the primordial purple energy in his body, constantly transforming it into this unknown, brand new power. Wu Qi had a realization that his current level of cultivation should be the same as those Dao-fusing saints, but he had embarked on a different path, a path that was completely different from the cultivation system of Pangu world. The source of this brand new power came from the 360 runes in the 13 layers of restrictive spells on the periphery of this relic. Perhaps, this was the most orthodox cultivation method in the sacred realm. Wonderful! What a great fortune! Wu Qi sighed. His divine will gently penetrated the entire relic, and the aura he sensed from it made Wu Qi realize how lucky he was. The self-protection measures of this relic were very tight, and there were definitely more than 13 layers of restrictive spells on the periphery. There were even all kinds of restrictive spells that could conceal auras and traces. During all these years, no one had ever discovered this relic, precisely because of those restrictive spells. However, too much time had passed, and this restrictive spell had been breaking down over and over again, weakening the ones on the periphery. Perhaps, when Wu Qi and his friends approached this place, the relic revealed itself from the void, and that was how Wu Qi and his friends came to this place by accident. Otherwise, even though this was a remote area of the chaotic world, it was impossible for no one to pass by this place. How could such a magical relic remain undiscovered? The light released from Wu Qi's body startled Princess Zhonglu and the others, who were also cultivating in the surroundings. Along with a beautiful melody, Princess Zhonglu and Yi Xia came to this place hand in hand. Seeing the strange light released from Wu Qi's body, Princess Zhonglu and Yi Xia opened their eyes wide in surprise. Princess Zhongli's perception was the sharpest, and she could clearly sense that Wu Qi had become incomparably terrifying at this moment. Although Wu Qi had a close relationship with her, Princess Zhongli still felt that Wu Qi was extremely terrifying at this moment. It was the instinctive fear of creatures at the bottom of the food chain towards creatures at the top of the food chain. Just like the current Yi Xia, she even hid behind Princess Zhongli. Her perception was not as sharp as Princess Zhongli's, but her instinctive intuition was more powerful than anyone else's. Yi Xia instinctively sensed that Wu Qi had become some kind of incomparably powerful existence, an existence that was trillions of times more powerful than the invisible heavenly demons from the outer realms. How could such a powerful existence exist in this collapsed chaotic world? Ao Buzan rushed over, laughing. He looked at the glowing Wu Qi and said, "How did you become like this?" Wu Qi glanced at Ao Buzan and pondered for a moment. Xiang Ao crooked his finger disrespectfully and said, "What's your cultivation base now? Attack me with all your strength." Ao Buzan looked at Wu Qi in surprise and said with a frown, "It's been so many years, and I've recovered all the cultivation base of my previous life. Also, with the help of the 7-colored spirit-containing lotus, my cultivation base is 100 times stronger than it was in my previous life. Do you really want me to attack you with all my strength?" A cold gleam flashed across Wu Qi's eyes as he said in a deep voice, "Just try it. My cultivation base has broken through, but it's not the realm of Tao fusing. I haven't fused with the heavenly Tao of any world. I seem to, I can't tell what kind of feeling this is. Attack me with your fist. Attack me with all your strength, then try your weapon and the divine ability of your dragons." Ao Buzan was a suspicious man, so when Wu Qi said that, he dared not attack. He tilted his head and looked at Wu Qi, frowning as he slowly flexed his fists and said with a smile, "Do you really want me to punch you? TSK, well, TSK, why don't you change it to someone else?" While he was chattering, Catfish Flood Dragon laughed out loud. She gave a loud cry and charged forward like a bolt of lightning, punching both her fists heavily on Wu Qi's body. When Catfish Flood Dragon's fists approached, Wu Qi carefully retracted the flame on his body and took the 2 heavy punches with his bare body. A muffled thud rang out, as if an iron hammer had struck a thick leather. Catfish Flood Dragon had a strange expression on her face as she gave a soft snort and staggered back dozens of steps. Her body spun rapidly, and she almost fell to the ground. Nothing happened to Wu Qi, and Wu Qi did not even feel the force of Catfish Flood Dragon's punches. But her fists were red and swollen, and her knuckles were broken into dozens of pieces. Catfish Flood Dragon snorted lightly and said, "Too hard, I can't break it. I've been fooled." Ao Buzan was taken aback. He gave Catfish Flood Dragon's red and swollen fists a glance, then suddenly sprung up into the sky, throwing his head back and letting out a long cry. His body spun rapidly like a windmill, then he thrust out his leg and kicked brutally at Wu Qi's face. Ao Buzan's leg smashed solidly on Wu Qi's face, but Wu Qi's facial muscles did not move at all. Instead, Ao Buzan's leg was bent at a 90-degree angle. Amidst the cracking sound of bones breaking, Ao Buzan howled miserably in pain. Shaking his head, Ao Buzan sprung up into the sky, transforming his body into a 100 miles long, pitch-black dragon. He opened his mouth and sprayed out a sticky, pitch-black flame, which poured down towards Wu Qi's head like a waterfall. It was the true flame of Dragon Core shot out by Ao Buzan after activating his Prime Dragon Core. Not only was its temperature extremely high, comparable to Wu Qi's Yuan Ling True Flame, it also contained a terrible poison, which made it one of the most vicious things in the world. Wu Qi raised his head and looked at the true flame of Dragon Core shot out by Ao Buzan. Deftly, he performed an incantation gesture with both hands, and the rune that represented light quickly took shape before the gesture. Next, a dreadful white light, which made everyone's eyeballs hurt and almost burned their eyeballs into charcoal, surged out from the rune. The black flame released by Ao Buzan twisted in the white light, turned into a puff of white smoke within a blink of an eye, then was quickly swallowed up by the white light. When Wu Qi released the rune gesture, everyone except him had drawn nearly 1,000,000 miles back. Everything around him, including those buildings and broken tiles in the remains, was covered in a strong white light. The white light seemed to merge with these buildings, and came out from the core of these buildings and broken tiles. Except for the white light and Wu Qi himself, nothing else existed in the surroundings. The people who had drawn far away stared at Wu Qi as if they were looking at a ghost. Ao Buzan murmured to himself, "Are you kidding me? What kind of magic is this? Even the world-purifying Buddha fire of Buddhism is not as powerful as this. It's completely unreasonable." Apart from that white light, it's as if no other existence is allowed. It's as if everything will be engulfed and assimilated into that white light. What kind of damn spell is this? Shuddering violently, Ao Buzan counted on his fingers and said, "Sir is already at the peak of the Tao-breaking realm, but he forced me to retreat with just one move. Even my strongest natal dragon fire is no match for him. Has he really broken through? TSK, if not the Dao-fusing realm, then what realm is it? Among the people, only Princess Zhonglu and Yixia were smiling, especially Yixia, who held her head up proudly and said with a smile, "This is the demon king chosen by Yixia. He is indeed the one and only demon king in the world. Except for the color of the light, who else can be stronger than Yixia's demon king?" Princess Zhonglu patted Yixia's head with a smile. The two of them looked at Wu Qi, who was in a daze in the distance, and sighed contentedly at the same time. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.